All right, ladies and gentlemen and everything possibly in between. Currently, it is 11:41 a.m. for me over in Phoenix, Arizona. Really awesome news, people. Out of nowhere, really. I will be making plans to return to Tennessee a lot sooner than I anticipated, and with the backup, with the support of those I am currently living with. It was kind of out of nowhere. It was an ambush, but the context of it, right? I'm looking forward to returning to Tennessee. But today we have a very special opportunity to invest ourselves into, people. So today we're going to be kickstarting the first date crosscast session with members of Haine, one of the only deathcore bands on the island of Malta. Before even reaching out to these gentlemen, I had no idea where Malta was as an island, but turns out it's tucked away. It's got its own little spot in the Mediterranean. So we look forward to introducing and beginning our chapters, beginning our legacy of reaching out to bands, networking with artists in yet another brand new country and a brand new part of the world for the Crosscast. So I'm very excited. Gentlemen, thank you for jumping in and, well, participating in this first date Crosscast session. As I said before we started recording, we're going to be starting out with an album listening session, a front to back session for your debut full-length album. This is a 10-song. This is a 10-song album. It's 42 minutes and 25 seconds. The album is called Fertile Void. And, well, let's just say I got introduced to these guys because they happened to already be in the Reclaimers Shadow of Intent Facebook community and group, and they happened to get Ben Durr of Shadow of Intent to feature on The Lake, one of the first songs to be released, alluding to the rest of this album. So, gentlemen, how are we doing? I know it's a little bit later for you guys.
So, thanks for the invite, Sean, first of all. We're stoked to be on here, getting to listen to the album with you and getting an honest reaction out of it, because, as you told us, you haven't listened to any of the tracks apart from The Lake so far. It was good to obviously introduce ourselves through the Reclaimers. The relationship with Ben as well for the feature also started back when we played a show with Shadow of Intent, Ingested, Signs of the Swarm, and Stillbirth in Germany during the Melancholy tour in August of 2022. And, you know, that good relationship into him joining up on Fertile Void.
Seriously, yeah. And it's so fascinating, too, that our conversation, when we were talking on Messenger and before this session, really, it was, yeah, we've been around for a little bit. We have a self-titled EP from a little whiles back, and we've also toured and played shows with plenty of these bands that I still have yet to host on the show, as well as some that I've already hosted, like Signs of the Swarm, namely with David Simonich III, which is insane to think about. Like, we started really strong, and we're still, trying to sustain that momentum and host more, like, momentous personalities, people in reference to Fertile Void and its purple color theme. We will be, I think, getting Andreas from Cabal on the show later this year, so I'm looking forward to that as their new album comes out in April. So we're hoping to get him on as well. But simply said, if you guys could actually do me a favor and briefly introduce yourselves by name, just in case we have some time for some questionnaire after doing the album listening session and the front to back review.
Hi, I'm Claudio. I'm the bassist of Haine, also one of the early original members of the band, which started as a project that I invested on mostly. And the guy over here will introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Jack. I joined Haine shortly after the first couple of singles, but during our debut show, I was already part of the lineup, so It's been quite some time working with this lad over here, and we've been working very close together in the writing of the EP, co-writing of the album together. So a long-standing relationship between the two of us.
Beautiful. I love to see it. Well, Claudio and Jack, thank you for being the first couple members of Haine to be on the Crosscast. All right, so welcome back, everyone. Immediately after doing a front-to-back album listening session and then a very, very quick front-to-back review, now we truly kickstart the Anatomy Crosscast and our first date session with one of the only bands, or one of the only deathcore bands on the island of Malta, that being Haine. Welcome, Jack and Claudio. Thank you for your time as we get through this questionnaire and have the opportunity to learn more about the both of you. How are you both doing today, or tonight in your time?
Right now it's 6:30 over here. No, all good here. Thank you.
Good, of course, you're welcome. So, simple as this, we kickstart the Anatomy Crosscast and its abundant questionnaire by having the both of you introduce yourself in a more casual manner. Maybe you're getting school kickstarted, right? Over here in the United States, it's elementary, middle school, and then high school, and then college, right? So maybe whilst you're still in your single-digit years, right, there are those occasions, if not a couple times, many times here in the United States, if you're jumping between multiple states, you have this conversation a lot. You're introducing yourself to the class once you move to a certain place and start school, right? So the same way that you would do that and introduce yourself to a class, let's go ahead and take about 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes for each of you, and let's go ahead and understand your name, what town you grew up in, and when it's not music, maybe let's talk about what you're doing for work, right? Or quite literally anything you enjoy doing outside of musical creation. Take it away, gentlemen.
Sure. So, Claudio Toscano over here. As the name might imply, I have Italian origins. My father is Italian, my mom is Maltese, so I'm half caste, let's put it like that. No, basically, so in my case, I think I grew up in Malta. It's difficult to explain the context of towns or stuff like that because it's such a small island that we have like localities and every town is, for you guys, Malta would be considered smaller than...
I mean, Malta is as big as Rhode Island.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
So
Right.
localities over here can be relatively interchangeable. No, but I grew up in an area close to the sea. And in my case, like, music was always second nature for me. Like, I grew up with my parents listening to music all the time. My sister was ever since she was very young, she always used to play the piano. So like I automatically got into the more classical sort of kind of aspect of music. Funnily enough, my first instrument is actually a flute. So that was the first instrument that I actually started learning. But in a couple of years' time, I automatically like shifted towards, let's say, more aggressive kind of music and rock. Let's put it like that. My father always used to like bands like Kiss, Led Zeppelin. We recently found out that he had a tape of Metallica, Ride the Lightning. So that was always somewhere around those areas. And then I automatically like shifted towards going into rock. Let's put it like that. A friend of mine at school wanted to start up a band. I originally wanted to start playing guitar, but we had already found one guitarist, a drummer, someone who could sing. So it was like fuck it, let's do bass. um, so, but, and that's how the whole thing started. Having like the classical background, and that thing already helped me understand music, like knowing compositions, knowing what I was looking for in music and in anything that I liked. And that was round about the same exact period where I automatically started gravitating more towards, I don't know, bands like Linkin Park and stuff like that. Which, as soon as I picked up the bass, I was already getting a bit more then into, you know, like the old school kind of the old school way of getting into metal, which was the typical Iron Maiden, Metallica, Slayer, and always getting worse and worse by every band. Yeah, so that's how things originally started. The first band was, let's say, metalcore kind of style, and that took me to the actually first band that I actually started up, which was the name was Innerlink, and it was full-on metalcore. It was the heyday of metalcore being like the big thing. It was the whole new wave of American heavy metal, you know, like the whole Killswitch Engage, the Devil Driver, Lamb of God, all those bands. So that's where I found kind of my footing in the metal industry, let's put it like that. Then after the first like band or two, I had actually auditioned for one of the heavyweight kind of bands in at least at a local level, which was called ClubMurder. And that's where I started actually playing with some seasoned local musicians. All the musicians in that band who had quite an extensive like history within the local metal scene, which put me more on the limelight in terms of music writing, metal writing, actually playing with more experienced musicians. I was still 15, 16 at that point in time, please note. So that helped me also understand a bit more how actual band logistics work, how you deal with people within a band, just something that I still learn, which Jack can vouch for. But it gave me a bit more of a better understanding on how you deal with the whole band situation, how you promote your band, how you promote your music and everything. After that, I had actually, I did 2 years with that band, and then there was a period where I literally and basically I just said goodbye to the music, to the whole music scene and to bands. I focused a bit more on university at this point in time. I had lost some of my own momentum in terms of playing with bands, finding time for it and everything. And for 6 whole years, I actually got my bass out like 3 times out of its case. Like I didn't even want to play at all. All right, okay. No, so there was the period, like I said, there was the period where I kind of focused a bit more on university and more on the academic side of kind of life, which then I eventually found a job. And having found that job and that full-time job, I had a bit more free time to start transitioning back into writing music. And within those 6 years, interestingly enough, I had always like kept an eye on the deathcore scene in general, like international deathcore scene. Having played metalcore, I automatically kind of gravitated a bit more towards a harder, a more heavy kind of style, and it was the heyday of bands like Whitechapel, All Shall Perish, As Blood Runs Black. So interestingly enough, yesterday you mentioned the MySpace era of deathcore, which I literally grew up on that in that era. Like I still remember the first album of Bring Me the Horizon coming out, the very early emo kind of looking Job for a Cowboy. So I literally ate up that whole scene. I was completely obsessed. So when I started playing music again after having done that break, I started playing again with this like local pop rock, relatively commercial kind of band. I wanted something like easy without having too many complications, kind of. But in the span of a year, I already started like having ideas on doing something myself, and automatically picking up a guitar. I was full on going on writing shit with blast beats and stuff like that, which wouldn't have exactly fit in that band. So it automatically transitioned into the me needing to have my own kind of creative output, have something different going on. And that's how actually one of the very first the very first release of Haine came about. It was just me writing at home, which resulted into a track which we still play nowadays, which is called This Darkness. It was the first single ever released by Haine, but it was still kind of in its infancy stages. And then like I ended things with that band and started focusing a bit more on my own music, kind of. And that's actually like the origins story of Haine, because I had written like 6-7 tracks, varied in style, but always like kind of more into the Whitechapel kind of aspect, which Whitechapel for me are a huge influence in general. Like I adore Whitechapel.
The Viscera tattoo.
Yeah, we have a story about Viscera, because yesterday you mentioned Viscera, and
shit. Okay.
yeah. So I have Viscera. We both love Viscera. We actually like the sort of comparison with Viscera, because we love Viscera,
And
especially me and Jack. We love Viscera,
And it's quite an unknown band in Malta, actually.
Mhm.
A lot of people
Exactly.
actually know of Viscera.
and funnily enough, I had always followed like the musical progression of Jamie, the vocalist. I love his vocals. I love his vocal style. I love it. I love everything about Jamie in terms of a musician. And funnily enough, in the days when he was still playing with Heart of a Coward, I have my whole back. I have this huge kind of spine tattoo with one of his lyrics, by the way.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So actually, you mentioning yesterday, Viscera, both of us were like, nice. That's a nice, interesting. Yeah, but going back to it, kind of like that's how the very initial stages of Haine started coming about. At that point in time, I had met an old friend of mine who was the original member and original guitarist of Haine, and we started like cooking some stuff up between us, and which automatically put us into a position where we needed someone to put in a voice and someone to play drums. Originally, our vocalist and our drummer, Chris and Conrad, came into the band kind of like as session members. But eventually they like gelled. We all gelled a bit more, and they filled in the full-time position. And that's how the very first 4 singles which Haine released came about, basically. And so for the next part of that story, then I'll leave it up to Jack, because that's where Jack sort of comes in as well.
Sweet.
Yeah, but I think that's quite a relatively comprehensive background check on me.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a background check. This is a job interview. No, I appreciate that. You ended up answering plenty of questions that I will admit at the beginning of the show with many other artists, maybe because they weren't sent the questionnaire before, I'm not sure, but there's a reason that the document is so massive, and it's because there have been plenty of sessions before, and no hate to any of the artists before, but there have been plenty of sessions where like I have to manually walk them through the questionnaire. You just kind of went through the whole thing, and you're like, you know what, crack, I got this, let's go. And you brought the heat. So great start to the session. Thank you, Claudio, for introducing yourself in a more intimate level, in a deeper level, helping us understand that at the very beginning, it was a balance between more casual rock and classic music, that even if you weren't studying on a college level with classical music theory, and then afterwards having that stamp on your shoulder, or even that badge on your shoulder claiming musical inclination, you were still engaged on both polarizing sides of what makes a musician, going back to the distant past and then modernizing with the help of your immediate family. Even today, with us being 94, 95 sessions in, not often are people able to say that their immediate family was integrated, responsible, or involved in their musical upbringing. So I'm sure that you hold that very, very close to your heart, and it's very charming. It has even a little bit of counterculture romanticism to it, really. The way that you were able to experience and enjoy these things with your own loved ones. And I look forward to digging even deeper as the session goes along. Jack, I do believe it is your turn. Let's go ahead and fill in the spaces, learn as much as we can about you over the next 20 minutes to half an hour. Let's hear of your contributions and your roadmap going into Haine and everything that you would want to introduce us with.
Yeah, so, hi, I'm Jack Pisani. For obvious reasons, my background check will be much shorter than Claudio because I'm 10 years younger than him. I'm a 2000 kid. So no, but basically, funnily enough, I've been listening to the more modern styles of metal since from an early age. I was introduced to Bullet for My Valentine, Trivium, Asking Alexandria, all these Motionless in White, all these sort of, the bridging between the metalcore and deathcore at the time bands, even other bands like Whitechapel. Since I was 12 years old, I was, randomly surfing on YouTube and I came across Waking the Demon by Bullet, and I was immediately hooked on that track. And then, I just dug myself into a deeper hole of experiencing newer and newer bands and newer music. But in terms of instrument playing, it came later on in life. I've picked up a guitar when I was around 16 years old. Basically, there was a Christmas concert at school, and I've had a friend of mine who was a drummer and another was a guitarist. They were participating. I was watching them play, and I was like, all right, I think I can pull this off if I have a guitar. So I went, I bought a guitar, and I started playing, just for the fun of it to join in the Christmas concert. With regards, sorry, I don't know how to stick to a chronological order. I'll jump around in timelines.
You're good.
Which is a standard in any of our conversations as well.
Yes, but even though I exposed myself to metal at quite an early age. My immediate family, my siblings and my mother, they're all lovers of music. We used to travel, for example, whenever we go on holiday to London, for example, we loved going to the musical plays such as Phantom of the Opera, Mamma Mia and stuff like this. So we're always exposed to different styles of music. So then, yes, I introduced myself to the Asking Alexandria, Motionless in White, Bullet, Trivium era of metalcore, and that led me to dig deeper onto the deathcore side of things. And that is where bands like Whitechapel, Walsher Parish, Fit for an Autopsy started, making their way onto my radar and into my music libraries. Starting to play guitar, I started off originally with a 6-string, but after 6 months I got fed up of it because I was seeing all these deathcore bands using 7-strings, so I just, fuck this shit, fuck this traditional learning, I want a 7-string. So I just sold my 6-string after 6 months and dedicated all my time to learning how to use a 7-string. To this day, I don't know how to play a 6-string. I consider it as a different instrument. But, fast forward a couple of years down the line, I've had the opportunity to join in the local metal scene, seeing Claudio play with his other bands as well, Conrad, our drummer, and Chris with their own individual bands, because the music scene in Malta is quite a big orgy. Every musician has about 3 or 4 bands. So early on, it was a transition between seeing all my now bandmates play in their own respective bands and saying, I want to do this someday, to in a couple of years down the line, I'll be playing alongside them in live shows and writing material together, which looking back, I'm very proud of it. Then when I was around 18 years old, Claudio approached me to join Haine, and down the line, we started going to rehearsals together. We started to gel. Like I said, I'm the the youngest one of the band. It was my first experience playing with other musicians. And introduction to Haine was quite funny. It was a Saturday afternoon. Claudio messaged me and he was like, if you want to have rehearsal in 2 hours. So I was like, okay, I think I can manage. I left work. I just told my boss, listen, I'm going to have to take the rest of the day off. Got the bus home, and public transport in Malta's shit. So I got the bus home, changed my clothes, got my guitar, made my way to Haine's rehearsal with another bus ride. All on a 2-hour, notice. Luckily enough, I went into rehearsal knowing the songs already. So, and then, a week down the line, Claudio was like, listen, we have a show in 2 weeks. So I had to quickly adapt, I'm still 19 years old. I've only been playing the instrument for 2.5 years. Never played with a band, never played with a drummer. And in a 3-week span, I had to brush up all the learning from the songs and, prepare myself to go into a live setting, which was, looking back, Maltese, we call it a giannata, which is, how would you say it in English?
It's just fucking crazy.
It's the time it was fucking crazy. And, still being a young guy, it was quite daunting, but I believe I held up to the pressure quite well.
I mean, you're still here nowadays.
Yeah, 6 years down the line. Throughout that entire process, then in my personal life, I was still going to school, university or college, whatever you guys call it in the US, juggling a part-time job to be able to finance my music hobby, because as everyone knows, it's not cheap.
It's not cheap, no.
Cheap, no. During that process, while I was, completing my bachelor's and my master's, Claudio and I co-wrote together the EP, our debut EP, which, 90% of the work was done by Claudio. But then we, through more experience together, we found a more middle ground to contribute both of our ideas, which is now Fertile Void. And speaking of the MySpace era, I think what we've accomplished so far is sort of like Claudio brings the ideas from the MySpace Deathcore era, whereas myself, being a younger guy, I bring the more modern influences that I grew up listening to and still listen to this day. But yeah, that's a quick background check for that 10-year age gap compared to Claudio.
Yeah. So, no, it's awesome because I was what I was meaning to mention earlier, before, the lack of microphone itself kind of killed the moment, is that Jack was as prepared for this background check to show up with the suit. I'm like, okay, this guy is ready to go. This guy is ready for an interview. Let alone
I just came from work.
Okay. Right. So in that case, if you're all well suited up, what do you do for work, my friend?
I'm gonna have to be the boring guy. I work in finance. I'm an M&A analyst.
That's not boring. That's important. That's important to where you are, I'm sure, and it's important everywhere. So, sometimes we need those little plot twists to remind us of the people behind the creative medium. Because you were mentioning earlier, right, that being in this industry is not cheap. And I remember growing up, even with my own old man, he was a little bit more bitter about it. But he always told me, like, yo, you can have a hobby, but make sure that you have a realistic financial backbone. Ladies and gentlemen, that would be Jack's financial backbone, is working finance over in Malta. So thank you both so far for answering the questions and providing the commentary that you have so far, letting us look into your background and understand who you are. Now, what I think I'm going to do right now is, whilst we're continuing to talk, I'm actually going to put on a couple slideshows, as Google seems to have some pretty nice slideshows, just kind of introducing us to Malta, right? I remember yesterday going into a shift as soon as we got done with that album listening session, and I was talking with a couple people. I'm like, yeah, like literally, I just finished a podcast with a band from an island I've never even heard of called Malta, let alone like it's just a new territory. It's a brand new music scene. And so I think it's very, very important that early on, as per the great questionnaire that we have, we go ahead and talk about location a little bit, or we jump over to question 4, location. So for those of you who don't know, and for those who may be listening to the show who have never heard of Malta before, if you could both kind of give us an introduction and maybe like where Malta is, what are some like kind of standout features to you guys, because we're seeing a lot of imagery here on the screen, including what seems to be a very, very beautiful, beautiful island. 1, 2, lots of like older architecture. So what can you guys tell us about Malta as we're introducing the audience, as well as most likely our co-host to the island of Malta? What can you guys tell us about this place?
No, I think Malta is one of the richest countries in the world when it comes to history. That nobody can take away from the island. So, for example, so we'll keep on topic with the music as well. The music video we shot for The Lake, which features Ben Doer, that was shot in a, we call it Valletta Underground. So Valletta is the capital city of Malta, which was built during the 1500s by the Knight Templars, the Knights of St. John. And underneath the city, they've built sort of like this very, very big water reservoir, in which a few centuries down the line, during World War II, it was further developed into a shelter. So this location, for example, is 5 stories beneath ground level, very, very humid, very big, and we've decided to get the Heritage Authority to grant us access for a day to film the music video. But it just from that location you have for about 500 years worth of history. Starting from the Knights up to World War II. Other than that, we've been passed around for ever since our existence, mainly. French, Italians, English, the Arabs, the Turks.
So just to put everything a bit more into perspective as well to what Jack is saying, basically the location of Malta makes it has very huge importance on why Malta, on the history of Malta, how it happened and why. So Malta is situated exactly beneath Italy, just beneath the island, the sister island of Italy, which is Sicily. So it's this tiny spit of land just beneath Sicily. So it's literally dead center into the Mediterranean Sea.
And it's off the coast of North Africa.
Exactly. So it's the link between, it's strategically and geographically speaking, it's just exactly in the middle between Africa and the rest of Europe.
Beautiful.
So historically speaking, what happens is that it is such a very particular location that throughout history, Malta has always been used as a kind of like a naval getaway in between continents. So back in the very, very, very early years of existence, Malta was always kind of like dominated by other bigger powers, basically. And they typically used to use Malta as a landing site, kind of either for their ships or for merchants, or to go around from one place to the other. So as Jack was saying as well, the first biggest kind of influence from a historical point of view were the Knight Templars, which kind of I forgot how many years they stayed in Malta, but they stayed in Malta for quite a large chunk of years. Yeah, exactly, something like that. And that's sort of where the Maltese culture kind of started developing even further.
It goes even beyond that. For example, we have these megalithic temples, which are older than the pyramids of Giza, for example.
That's insane. What?
Yep. Yeah, so from Neolithic times, basically, Malta was always kind of like habited. And as Jack is saying, so basically these Neolithic temples, they actually they extend even further from Giza, and they extend even from the Neolithic temples in England, Stonehenge.
Wow.
So, like, it shows that culture in one form or another has always been around over here.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful.
I think, a cool history fact that I like to mention whenever I talk about Malta is during World War II, it was the most bombed country.
Well,
The amount of aerial bombings Malta had from Germany during World War II and from the Italians, I think if we look at bombing ratio, we're the most bombed country during the war. But the Maltese people, and with the help of the English, managed to stick by it. We will not be conquered again.
Exactly. But even it ties also with what I was saying about the location of Malta. So the thing with World War II, especially, was the fact that at that point in time, Malta was governed by the British, by the Brits, and it was a constant tug of war, kind of like between England holding their base operations in Malta, as well as Germany wanting to invade Malta, because it always had the link either with Africa, and we know that during World War II there were quite big ties with Africa as well, in terms of resources, as well as a route towards the east.
yeah.
So yeah, I think realistically speaking, part of this whole kind of culture growing up and learning all about this kind of stuff, one thing that always defines us Maltese is the fact that despite the limitations that we have as a country, despite the fact that Malta is so small, so many limited opportunities, is that we always have this kind of like willingness to put a stamp, at least at an international level,
Yeah.
despite the fact that it might be kind of like totally unrealistic. But in one way or another, we kind of like always find some way to, at least, even if it's just a tiny shoelace, but at least we started getting somewhere, kind of,
Right. No, it's really
And then, yeah,
charming.
from all the images that you are seeing, basically, it's a small island, so it's surrounded by sea.
It's always sunny.
It's mostly sunny. Like for us now is winter, because we had 2 days of cold, and basically the rest of the year it's mostly bearable.
By cold, we mean 10 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's really charming and very colorful, this island. But not only that, but even seeing some of the what I can only assume is kind of the with this image, which I'll go ahead and pull up, and then I'll refresh the streaming that way, and we all understand as context to the crosscast what we're looking at, but I would assume that this more complex architectural structure then is this kind of like the downtown, like the main touristy area. Do you guys have like a major city, or does it all just kind of like melt together? Because downtown cities and like central areas where there would also be an airport, that's definitely something that we kind of identify with over here in the US. And I mean, I think other major like superpower countries like the UK, Russia, China, Japan, they kind of understand the term downtown as well. But it seems that because Malta is such a small island, maybe there's not enough room for that. Maybe, there's more local ferry options as far as getting from Italy or surrounding nations to Malta. How does all that work for you guys?
In Malta, we don't have the concept of downtown, kind of like you can either see it in both ways. It's either everywhere is downtown in Malta, or everywhere is not downtown. So the localities, there are a couple of localities which are like the more centralized hubs in terms of like population, in terms of entertainment and all that stuff.
Right.
And then there are the other localities which are more kind of like, I think you would consider them as like more suburban areas, which are the more residential, quieter kind of parts.
I see.
Typically localities which are closer to the sea have a bit more life going on.
Right.
So pretty much that's how like it is stratified in Malta. The image that you were seeing, that actually is Valletta as well. So the location that Jack was telling you, that basically is, it's the capital of Malta, and it is one of the more kind of like commercial / touristic areas.
I see.
And touristic because, of course, there's a lot of history kind of like centered around that part of Malta.
Right. No, it's beautiful either way.
I think what was happening was the audio was actually catching up to get to here.
Oh, wow. Okay. Damn. We've had that happen a couple times, so I guess it's not going to be the first, not going to be the last time.
When you're sharing content from another window, such as Google, it's lacking the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, probably. Vampiric, really. But continuing then upon the questionnaire, let's see. Would you say that your history in the place that you grew up and were born in affected the way that you would write music?
Yes, by far. Because being in the middle of the Mediterranean and of the coast of North Africa and the Middle East, being exposed to all these cultures, especially from a music point of view, gives us a bit more ideas. So, for example, there is that one specific sample in Twisted Monuments, which sounds like an Arabic song.
Which is not,
but you know,
Yep.
Even the Egyptian vibes, or you know, it's probably because of the culture we grew up in. But you know, being in such a hub in the Mediterranean, it's easier maybe for us to know, you know, I got stuck in terms of wording. Different inspirations.
Yes.
Just
You're
sums up
able
like this.
to pluck different things from different cultures, being that you're at the epicenter of so many polarizing and different cultures, like very distinguishable cultures at that. I love that. It's a good answer. Would you say that you are connected to this day to where you were born and raised? And this can be from either a sense of being interconnected with the music scene, whether it's smaller or bigger over in Malta. Would you say that you end up having a lot of pride being one of the very first bands of your genre niche who happens to be from Malta?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're very proud of the fact that we are Maltese. We are a Maltese band, and we are doing this kind of music and getting our stamp around, kind of with the fact that we're from Malta. A lot of like foreign contacts that we have, a lot of foreign bands that we spoke to and everything, when you tell them that we're from Malta, everyone is like, oh wow, I wouldn't have expected that from a Maltese kind of band or something like that. So that always, it strangely enough, it gives us that kind of slightly different edge that you wouldn't expect that kind of material coming from such a tiny island.
Yeah.
Of course, there are limitations as well. Like, I think it's a general feeling for us Maltese that we love to hate Malta, but at the same time, we're super proud of the fact that we're Maltese. Of course, because of course the limitations, one of the biggest limitations that we always have in terms of like being a musician or being an artist and getting your music across or your art across, is the fact that it's a small island. You always have to catch a plane. You always have to go around. You can't, like we don't understand the concept of getting a bus and going around. We always have to literally get a plane and have to fly, which means 2-3 times as much the costs.
Right.
And we only have one music venue that's set up for metal shows. So, touring is limited in terms of networking because it's not like big bands are popping into your city every other week, so you can go meet up with them at the merch table, have a chat,
Yeah.
share songs and ideas. On the other side, we need to limit ourselves to the amount of shows we play every year. We tend to focus on not more than 4 shows a year because you can't oversaturate the market.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's like, especially when you are in such a tinier spot in the world. And I mean, really, I have a feeling that Haine and a couple artists that we have yet to discuss, but really that'll be the next point of discussion. Um, when it comes to that, it's like not only do you not want to oversaturate yourself, but you want to give other people room to grow. If there are any kind of phantoms per se, or any younger people who are looking to do the same thing, maybe because they're inspired by Haine. So in that case, I think right now would be a really good time to talk about the scene. So I'm very unfamiliar with Malta as per the context of this first date session reaching to this strange, new, colorful, beautiful island etched into ancient world history then. So then, would you guys say that Malta has a scene? And if they do, and if it does, what are some other bands that you can name off that maybe you guys have been interconnected with in Haine's upbringing thus far?
So a local scene does exist in Malta. We can give it an approximate number as well, which we're talking about not more than 600 people in reality. And that's being generous as well. But it is a very, very, very dedicated kind of scene. Like Jack was saying before, the fact that, so from those 600 people, you have, I would assume, 150 that are musicians.
And about 50 active bands.
Yeah. So it's a very densely kind of populated, all considering with the population of Malta in terms of a scene. And in terms of bands that are actually kind of making a name, which are local bands from Malta, I can mention 3 particular bands. There is one of the oldest bands that actually made the big jump towards the international scene. Is called Beheaded.
Okay.
Then there is Abysmal Torment, which I'm the bassist of as well.
Nice.
Like Jack was saying, it's a whole kind of mess with this kind of thing. And then there is also so Beheaded and Abysmal Torment are both death metal bands. So full on the brutal death metal kind of style. And there is actually a doom band called Forsaken, which at least at a European level they had made quite a good name for themselves. They're some of the oldest and most long-standing bands in Malta. And I can say myself, in terms of Abysmal Torment at least, these 3 bands are quite well established, at least more from a European kind of aspect. Of course, for European bands to do the jump towards the US, it's a bit more complicated. But they gave quite a good name to Malta in terms of that.
I mean, both Beheaded and Abysmal Torment, you guys headline European shows.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you look at Death Fest, that's organized in Germany every year. It's a big festival for the death metal scene, and both Abysmal Torment and Beheaded are always, through next to the headlining acts, if not the headlining acts, and even, other Maltese death metal bands get to play every year.
Yes,
Bound to Prevail, have Repugnance. So, in my opinion, at least for such a small country with a relatively small scene, the quality of music is very high.
Good. That's really awesome to hear. And I do believe I've heard of Abysmal Torment. If not, it was another 2-word name that started with Abysmal. But I do believe I've heard of Abysmal Torment. And both primarily MySpace, new wave MySpace co-host, my very first co-host, that being the Orc King. Shout out to you, buddy. Wish you were here with us to enjoy this conversation and kind of indulge upon what could be one of the first MySpace-inspired deathcore bands from Malta. When he's not doing that, he's indulging a little bit into brutal death metal, and then we have our Necro Thuggin co-host Tony Slam, who is looking into like hip hop, or basically my co-hosts, as I add maybe one more to the roster, their job is to help me kind of talent scout, right, for all of our future bands, but in a niche genre. So for Finn, the Orc King, it's MySpace deathcore and more like MySpace takes on most of those subgenres. So he's like the MySpace guy, and then Tony Slam does hip hop and slam. But hopefully then in the near future we can look into getting these legends, these Maltese legends in the brutal death metal scene, who have then, quote, headlined shows away from Malta over in Europe. Hopefully we can get them on the Anatomy Crosscast and then, well, truly piece together what has been the counterculture scene, underground counterculture scene of Malta so far. And those are just two that Claudio has mentioned so far. And then, well, of course, Jack also jumped in conversation with. What are some other bands that, for example, the Crosscast should be possibly reaching out to in the future, do you think? That happen to be from Malta, because we want to make sure to give this beautiful, ancient country and all of its local artists a shot and give them some limelight.
I think, two bands that I really enjoy in the local scene. One of them is ClubMurder. There's a joint term. There is no space. If you look it up, it's ClubMurder. Claudio can give more details. He'll better explain the style of music they play. And there is also another up-and-coming band. They've been playing live shows over the past year and a half, 2 years. Sort of like this necrophagist-inspired death metal by the name of Halcyon.
Okay. And you guys will definitely have to, if nothing else, type those band names in chat. That way I don't misspell them. But I do appreciate then you introducing me to these other artists and kind of relieving my ignorance of thinking that Haine is one of the first of its kind, period, in Malta, as far as like heavier subgenres of music. Now, as we're talking about opportunities that Maltese bands have gotten in the past, making history for the island and then headlining European shows or maybe even European tours, right? We were talking about Viscera earlier, which really, between you guys, is correlating and shared inspiration by definitely older generations of Whitechapel. Not sure how you guys feel about the newer stuff, but that's like some of my soul food, really. Yeah, okay, good. So we're on the same table with that. Some might consider a dad rock, but for me, listening to the Valley Kin and hopefully some pieces of Hymns and Dissonance, but I have a feeling that they ended that tradition. They ended that era between the Valley and Kin with those two albums. Very, very charming music that reminds me of my new home. You listen to songs off of Kin, like I Will Find You, Orphan, Anticure, and, well, my new home, Tennessee, which I will be returning to by the end of the year or next spring. It definitely just sounds like Tennessee, which is really nice. So let's talk about Viscera. You guys both seem to have a fascination with this band, and not often am I able to rein in spotlight for them and give them the attention that I think they deserve. Not only is Viscera made up in lineup of the frontman of Jamie Graham, formerly of Silosis and Heart of a Coward, I do believe. And, well, now he is the main face. He is the CEO of one of my favorite record labels of all time, that being Unique Leader Records. So I'm sure you guys have a couple stories then, or at least that's the impression I was getting earlier, is that you guys have a couple stories, maybe in-person impressions, interactions that you've had with this band. Let's go ahead and zone in on that a little bit, and let's hear you guys' perspective on one of my favorite bands of all time.
So actually, I remembered when Viscera started posting, like poking around when they started coming up as a band. I remember me having this kind of like particular interest with Jamie Graham. Like I actually interacted with him when I was playing with Abysmal Torment. We were playing in London. Like I hadn't done my back tattoo at that point in time, however. But I had always like I remember him with Silosis. That's as early as I remember his style, and I was always like very into it. He has a very distinct, unique kind of voice. He has these fucking amazing cleans, but then he can go out full on belters. Yeah, but I remember when they had started already like pointing towards this new kind of band, me and Jack automatically were already kind of like getting into it because of what also Jamie Graham brings about, which was his past with Heart of a Coward. Me and Jack both really loved Heart of a Coward. We still listen to them nowadays. So it was interesting to see even just a bit more kind of violent imagery sort of to what Heart of a Coward typically brings to the table, with what ultimately resulted in Viscera. A funny story that I can recall right now with regards to Viscera is that actually me and Jack were in this even smaller sister island of Malta, like on a we just went over for the day.
And you went to go pick up your cat.
No. But yeah, I remember we were in my car and we just found out that the album had dropped. And we just spent the next like 40 minutes in my car with full on sound, windows closed and everything, and we're just like fucking amazed at it. And yeah, we are very looking forward to see what the next step of Viscera is. If I'm not mistaken, I think they're starting to meddle around a bit again. So very interested to see what the next version or progression of Viscera will be.
Yeah, no, seriously. What I think is very fascinating about Viscera, as I made the kind of like marketable, just like they're like the architects of deathcore or something. It's a very, very strange thing to introduce to new people who may be listening to them, but that's really been my fascination with them, is that Jamie Graham as a vocalist, he brings together the best parts of Nothing More's Johnny Hawkins, Architects' Sam Carter, and because of his experience within Silosis and Heart of a Coward, I do believe he mixes like really, really heavy but raw vocals in a really, I don't know how else to say it. He's done the work. He's probably ruined his voice a couple times, but it ended up giving him this unique twist on heavies that only he can do. And then on top of that, yeah, he's absolutely a killer singer. And both with Obsidian and Carcinogenesis, which I have actually the Carcinogenesis wall flag, like right behind my setup right now. I'm always looking up at that, just like, man, I really hope I can get Jamie Graham or some of the guys from Viscera on the show at some point, because I don't think they're appreciated nearly as much. But then on top of that, just thinking that in a very similar way to back in the day when I found personalities like Franz from Attila, who then was the CEO of Stasic Records, and at the time they would house bands like Enterprise Earth and Body Snatcher before those two bands would also depart and find something different. Well, at that time, I think Stasic Records was kind of at its peak, and I was like, whoa, so this guy, not only has he been doing Attila this whole time, he started a new project called Bone Crew, but he's also the CEO of a record label. And in that, I was like, okay, so Jamie Graham is kind of like a better version of that. His music is less douchey. Because Attila has its niche as far as, the fans that it accumulates. It's a very, very similar demographic, I think, to most of the Juggalo artists like not Ice Nine Kills, Insane Clown Posse, Rob Zombie, where it kind of just sounds like glorified drunk rant music half the time. So then
I tend to call it, I tend to call it a bit more like frat boy deathcore in the case of us.
frat deathcore or something like that. Exactly. And
Exactly.
yeah, for me, Attila is kind of one of those newer artists who takes on that drunk rant music and makes it very, very heavy, but very fun at the same time. For me, then Jamie Graham kind of upped that standard, and I'm like, you know what? I would really, really, really love one day to be able to jump on that record label, get him featured on a track, and then maybe even open for Viscera as a band. Needless to say, I like the band. I appreciate them a lot. I appreciate what they do for modern counterculture music. And then, of course, they are led, if you're into frontman syndrome, I guess, where you're just focusing on the singer for whatever reason. Um, their frontman, I think, is one of the coolest frontmen in the scene. There have been so many bands I've hosted on the show that happen to have, whilst I was networking with them, prepared to jump on Unique Leader Records, or maybe it just seemed like that. Bands like Worm Shepherd, before things kind of fell apart between us, The Breathing Process, Party Cannon, I do believe The Last 10 Seconds of Life, too. I was networking with them a little bit before they would jump on, but not nearly as intimately as other bands. It's just been a really, really interesting roadmap, and to a certain degree, just manifesting this, of course, I hope that Haine ends up being one of the future bands who decides to join, because I think you guys would fit in really well with them. And I think if you guys haven't heard of them, the Voynich Code from Portugal. Have you guys? Okay. Love those guys. We've had them on the show. We did a really, really intimate first date session for their latest 2023 album, Insomnia. It's jumpy, it's fun, but it's also super, super heavy and doesn't lean too much into the deathcore elements, I would dare say, like Haine does. But of course, they hit definitely with their bass guitar playing. I'm sure, Claudio, you could agree with this as well. You could definitely compare it to Ginger as far as like its jumpiness and like how, yeah, it's really, really fun. And simple to say, it's cool to know and understand looking back even 2 years now. Um, Officially 2 years this November of 2025, but still, it's been a long time since we've had him on the show. That was an awesome experience, and we hope to host many more bands like that, including Haine. Um, because all these sessions are really fun, and it's really just homework, but it's networking in a very unique way where we just, world domination. That's the main punchline, right? So then, as we're continuing to talk about the scene here and there, whilst we have you both on the show, um, so Claudio, you said your first band was Interleak, and that was metalcore. Are they still around?
No, no, no. It's so basically the name is Innerlink, just to be precise. No, no. Basically, three members had departed to England to study music, and with just a bassist and the vocalist, we didn't see it the right opportunity to kind of continue the band.
Right.
I mean, I still hold very dear memories of that band. Occasionally, I'll see one of them come back to Malta for a holiday or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was instrumental towards my, as cheesy as it may sound, my musical journey, kind
Yeah.
of.
Well, yeah, of course it did. Because, like, there's no reason to hesitate upon that statement. Because, I mean, hell, you're talking to a guy that hasn't even gone really to the stage of playing in a garage with consistent musicians. It's always been people who had the headcanon ambition and just like, you know what, I really want to be in a band. Let's make a logo. Let's decide the band name already. We haven't even played any music yet, and that would happen about, I would say, 6 times throughout my middle school years, which would be 7th grade. As far as years, that would be like 2013, 14. That spanned throughout high school, even to the tail end of high school and me graduating. And even since then, not really much has happened. Like, it's mainly been me carrying that anvil of ambition, or carrying that world worth of ambition, like Atlas holding up the world itself. It's mainly been me continuing that ambition. Now, I will admit that since then, some people that I've worked with, they have made consistent bands, and I almost joined one, but then their vocalist, their frontman, he ended up getting a little bit too political, and, you know, I don't mind if people have different political opinions, but when they decide to out you and name call you for these political opinions, it's like, I have no interest in working with people like that. And then they would proceed to smear that, like, I'm so glad I don't work with this type of person. I'm like, what are you doing, man? That's how you lose opportunities. So, you know, if nothing else, I've learned that it continues to be very, very beneficial to surround yourself in drastically different people than yourself, as long as there is a agree to disagree, or, you know, we have different opinions, let's respect that, and then proceed beyond that to make music together. That's kind of my bottom line as far as standards. So hopefully I look forward to recruiting people like that in the future and continue to network with people like that in the future. Because everybody's different, you know what I mean? You can't exactly surround yourself with the same person or with people who like the same color as you or who like the same exact band as you, because eventually, well, all tethers, I think, all connections, all friendships, all senses of, or applications of, pardon me, camaraderie, brotherhood, right? Even that's mortal in most cases. But one can only hope that you're able to grow together with these people and proceed beyond simple philosophies or different preferences. So then, as far as you guys' involvement in the scene, you know, you both were part of a scene more or less growing up, maybe getting into your later years, getting more involved in the community. What are some of, like, the first localized moments that you guys had, right, where you were seeing different artists and you were like, okay, yeah, this can be done here? When would you both say, as far as a year, that kick started for you?
I think in my case it was it was around about 2006, 2007, I would say, when the three actual bands that I mentioned, like Abysmal Torment, Beheaded, and Forsaken, were on quite a good high of playing a lot of foreign shows and making a name for themselves. Beheaded in particular, for example, some of their members are solely musicians. That's their job, basically. Forsaken, for example, had done a huge number of major doom metal festivals, and were getting a very good name for themselves. And similarly, Abysmal as well, and the Brutal Death, Brutal Slam, all that stuff. Like, me joining Abysmal Torment, besides this is always besides Haine, but me joining Abysmal Torment as well, it was like a whole kind of eye-opener to see. I remember a lot of occasions in the very first shows abroad where people would come on to me and like, oh man, I've been listening to your music for the past 15 years. And all I could say at that point was like, well, I've been in the band for 2 years. I've like, aren't listening to me.
It's like, thank you, but I haven't been here that long. I'm still pretty new.
But it's a kind of a strange situation to see as well how much whatever you are putting out creatively can extend beyond your shores. But like I said, around about 2005, 2006, for me, it was a huge game changer to see these bands kind of like pushing through and actually getting out there, getting recognized by labels as well, big labels as well.
Beheaded was a unique leader, I think.
Beheaded was with Unique Leader. I can't remember Forsaken for the time being.
Beheaded was a
but yeah, they were with Unique Leader before. So yeah, but that's the point where I said like, okay, someday I have to get there.
Yeah, naturally. So then I think we should definitely touch up on your maybe experiences that have allowed you to proceed different levels of being involved in the music industry as you joined Abysmal Torment, right? So, and maybe this is knowledge that you would then carry into your own efforts, more or less your own efforts, right? With Haine, you kickstarting it, you inviting more members on, and then boom, now you have your own thing going on. Ironically, very similar to another bassist we had on the show recently. His name is Stain. Shout out to the boys in Celestial Scourge. Tactical death metal from Norway, Oslo, Norway. They're very, very involved in their scene. I would say on a very similar, if not the same level as you guys are. And their vocalist, that being Erik, definitely not pronounced like that. A lot more Norwegian, a lot more Northern European. He even manages the local death metal music festival over in Norway, which is so cool. The numbers though, it's kind of funny how much they're comparing. Like they have also about like a 600 person scene as far as like people involved in black metal, death metal, traditional death metal, so technical death metal, all those genres, right? So then ironically enough, another situation where we have a bassist being involved in another bigger band who has had the opportunity to go abroad, go beyond their country, go beyond their nation, and then kind of learn some things. So what would you say, being in Abysmal Torment, what are some things that you've learned from touring with them, having your first touring experiences most likely? What are some of the most important things you've learned whilst being the bassist for them in your time with them so far?
I think the biggest lesson I learned was actually like as obvious as it might get, but in reality, it's the whole networking. Basically, it's constantly and all the time all about networking. Talking to distributors, talking to musicians, talking to labels. So basically, you just put on a face. It's put on a face as in you have to. It's game time, kind of. You know, it's game time, but in a more friendly kind of manner at the end of the day, because this is something that we all enjoy doing, and we enjoy doing what we love doing at the end of the day. Yeah, but in terms of networking, it was a huge eye-opener. Also, something which I always value a lot, having learned it and putting it into Haine as well, is something which is very real, but it's not discussed about a lot sometimes, I think, which is managing expectations as well. So basically, you know, it's like different contexts, different bands, different standings in terms of where the band is at and everything. So realistically speaking, even it happens with Haine, for example. We release something, we believe that this is the best product that we did. We believe that it deserves X amount of merit, kind of, you know. But at the same time, even with other bands, for in this case, for example, with Abysmal, managing expectations is something that was very crucial to always help us as well stay grounded, understand that we are just one other band. We're doing our very best at doing things the correct way, we believe, at least. But as well, we know that the pond is infinite.
Drop in the ocean.
And we know that it takes a lot and a lot and a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot of commitment to actually just get somewhere. I mean, even just an opportunity, for example, like this interview, you can't take for these situations for granted, because at the end of the day, first off, it's super fun. And secondly, it's like it's helpful even towards your kind of career progression at the end of the day.
Right.
It is the things that you can know. It is how you connect. It is what your networking is, how it's going, and it's a platform at the end of the day. So, again, this is a small shout out at the same time as a thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, that's the beauty of it.
No,
really.
but
It's what's that?
even to build up on Claudio's point, as in, I always tell Claudio and the rest of the band, you need to treat a band as a business at the end of the day. You're spending money, you're not making a lot of money, so just at least try and make it as efficient as possible.
That's fair. That's fair. No, honestly,
That's
there's
why
like
he's an economist.
right. No, exactly. It's it's a it's a niche situation being in a band, especially in the modern day and era. Like hell, yesterday I think Spotify would publish an article announcing their collaboration with Universal that would kind of that's I think it's going to flip the music industry on its head, right? And the reason I say that is because now, unless if you're in the same tiers of following and reception as bands like Lorna Shore, you're not really going to be making any money from now on. However, from what I've understood, their intention is to make it to where the people who really, really have a following, they're making more money. Um, so it's like when you think of that, you definitely have to center in and focus on your band or you as a musician being a businessman, being a working. You're working, and half the time you're not really making that much money. So then you got to be as professional as possible whilst still having that sense of brotherhood and camaraderie and the artistry involved in there. It's a very, very difficult balance, and I'm seeing the ways being like tipped ever more as time goes on. But it's good to have that in mind, and I mean, definitely something that I'm looking forward to once I do acquire consistent musicians is just making my band as innovative and stand out as possible. It's not really a band, it's still a project because there's only me, but you got to definitely keep those things in mind going now into 2025. So it's good that you guys have that in mind too. Especially in regards to where you're located. It makes it even more difficult. There's more limitations, like you guys said. So it's even more important to hone in on the professional aspects of Haine. So then, touching into the financial investments, right? We all know that being in a band is not cheap, and especially when you are one of the instrumentalists of a band, let alone maybe this question or this part of the conversation applies best to those who are doing all the instrumentals on their own. They are tired of waiting for other musicians, so they decide to buy the gear. They decide to become sound engineers and audio engineers, and then go from that point, right? So then let's talk gear, right? I assume that you both are gearheads. You're into gear. You have a romantic fascination with it. So let's go ahead and talk about you guys' current gear setup for all of our gearheads out there listening to the show. What's your current setup, and what are some of the dream toys that you want to add to your arsenal going into the future?
So, I recently had a shift in gear. So both Haine's EP and the album Fertile Void were recorded on an EVH 5153, the classic 6L6 tube head, and I used to pair that with the 14 pedals, the 1433 and the Zoo for the noise gate. And in my opinion, it was a well-defining setup for Haine sound. It was mid-heavy, which gave a lot of room for the other instruments to fill up the sound. In terms of guitars, I've been using Jackson and Ibanez guitars ever since I've started playing guitar, but recently I've just acquired a quad cortex because I don't want to carry around amps. I want something digital that fits in my backpack. So if we play a show in Malta or abroad, I always have a consistent setup to my sound. And I also have an Aristides from the Netherlands coming in a couple of weeks, so between the quad cortex and the Aristides, that would be my dream gear lineup complete.
Okay. Okay. So then right now you're pretty comfortable with your setup, or are there still a couple of things you're looking to add to your arsenal?
No, as soon as the guitar arrives in a couple of weeks, I'll be set.
Okay, cool. There you go. I mean, you found exactly what you wanted. You had the financial resources to invest into it, and I'm sure that that will be reflecting upon the future efforts and sound of Haine. Claudio, what do you got going on?
So in my case, I actually before I get exactly into it, I want to mention one thing, which is like the backstory of how my gear got.
Absolutely.
And because you mentioned the whole MySpace Deathcore era. So in that period of time, one thing that always stood out for me as a bassist was As Blood Runs Black and their bassist. They had this very particular clunky kind of tone that I always said I have to get to a point where I get there. Fast forward, what now, 18 years, I think, something like that. I finally have, like, I actually, as well, my dream setup is what I currently have. Like, ever since Periphery came out and Nolly got his signature model, I own two Dingwalls. For me, they are the ultimate, nastiest, best bases ever. So I have the NG Combustion, which is the signature model of Nolly Get Good. And that model comes with the with the Dark Glass preset, with the Dark Glass EQ in it, the preamp. So to pair it up perfectly, I got myself a Dark Glass amp as well. And so I have the whole complete setup, basically just Dingwall and Dark Glass. In terms of my sound, I think it's the bassiest, clunkiest,
Mid-boosted.
exactly. And it is just exactly right down my alley on what I want bass to sound in an album. And especially that also came into the sound in general of Haine, because we actually, now besides me being biased on it, but we do pride ourselves on having quite a bass heavy kind of style. And the bass, for us, it's crucial that the bass is not the hidden instrument, but rather another instrument which is there as present as guitars, as present as vocals, as present as drums. And it gives us that kind of voice as well in the whole complex of what you hear when you hear a Haine song.
There you go.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much it in terms
Yeah.
of gear from my end.
Have you heard of Aristides guitars, Sean?
No.
No. Have you been following Spirit Box?
Yes.
Yes, so their guitarist is one of the leading artists with Aristides, Mike Stringer. So it's this company out of the Netherlands, and their guitars are 0% wood, nothing. So it is an exoskeleton, which is about 5 layers of different glass fibers and carbon fibers. It is then pressure pumped with this proprietary material they have, which is called arium. It was developed in the late 90s by a group of chemists, and the aim was to create this material which is more acoustically balanced and more resonant than wood. And then it comes paired with a rich light fretboard, custom pickups, blah, blah, blah. But, the concept of the guitar is it has no wood whatsoever, but it's more stable, it's more acoustic. And given that, wood warps with humidity and with changes in temperature, this guitar doesn't.
Ooh, okay. So it's a new kind of like immortal take as far as like it's how long it can last. So it can last a lot longer than the wooden guitar, and also have some improvements as far as the acoustics technology. That's cool. I like
And
that.
even how the material is developed. So on the technical side, how an ebony fingerboard tends to have a bit more low end, whereas a maple fretboard has a bit more snap to it.
Yes.
The construction of this guitar is sort of like a best of both worlds.
Okay. That's sick. Yeah, and I mean, pardon me, not that I'm nearly as seasoned a musician to understand the importance of that or have the first-hand experience and being able to tell the differences between those mechanics, right? Between the different types of woods. Wanting to become a bassist in the near future, like Claudio, like Stain from Celestial Skirt and so many others, and being able to one day dance across that fretboard and make it sound like the bass guitar itself is dancing around a little bit, maybe doing some flamenco and descending through some ancient hallways. I'm definitely trying to become more engaged with the technologies and the fine little details that make playing bass guitar so fun to do, especially on a tech depth level, most likely, or maybe like Polyphia's level, maybe. We'll see. It all starts with the more simple slam chunks, though, let's be honest. The 0-1, 5-5-4, 0-1, all that. So I definitely look forward to becoming more intimately involved with my my bass guitar. It's a 4-string Ibanez. It's a pretty simple one. It's like it's a white to dark gray fade. It's really nice. But it has some pretty clunky bass, like some thick, callus-friendly bass strings, and I look forward to engaging with it more as soon as I have the money to acquire an amp. I do believe that will be the end of the gear talk, though, just for now. Just for now. As we get into the future, I'm sure we'll talk plenty more about it. Hell, we might have some conversations off screen about it. As I understand that you guys need to be departing soon, I think the last question that I want to ask today would be, so far, with the self-titled EP, as well as, which is now out on all streaming platforms, Fertile Void, and if anything, we hope to at least get like one more day in there. That way we can do some lyrical dissection with the lyricist of Fertile Void, as well as get you guys' perspective on the concepts behind Fertile Void lyrically. What are some of the most important albums that you guys are listening to when it came to writing Fertile Void?
All right. So in my area, at least, anything related to Whitechapel, Fit for an Autopsy, Signs of the Swarm, Shadow of Intent, Within Destruction. So the more recent era of deathcore. I think when it comes to specific albums, or what the future holds was big in terms of inspiration, as well as
was Kin.
The Valley.
Yeah, beautiful.
Which I prefer. He has a Whitechapel tattoo as well.
Fuck yeah, love that.
So yeah, to me it was more leaning towards what those bands were doing at the time and taking inspiration, using those ideas and try to make it our own.
There you go.
I think as well, I think during the process of writing all the songs, there was some inspiration from Enterprise Earth as well. We took a couple of ideas of that.
We even talked to Gabe throughout the process.
Yeah, exactly. Because exactly, actually, yeah. Because when Psalms of Agony came out, there was that very like bassy part in the breakdown that I just wanted to kind of capture that whole vibe. And like out of nowhere, I just messaged Gabe, and I'm like, "Listen, dude, can you please tell me what you did?" And he gave me the whole fucking rundown of how he got that tone, and I'm like, thank you." So they were very cool about it. I'm very thankful for that whole opportunity. Also, there was a specific period where we were a bit also getting inspiration from Signs of the Swarm and Brand of Sacrifice as well.
Yes.
So
Archspire.
Yeah, Archspire for a slightly more technical stuff. And then something, especially in parts where I write the music, my roots are always centered as well around At the Gates. So some slightly more like melodic depth, kind of that balance. In my case, I later on in life realized that I always come up with ideas which originate from their kind of style. Which to me, I mean, I am one of those guys who actually says that the whole Swedish melodic death era played a very crucial point towards metalcore and the more, how shall I say, the more harmonic kind of parts of deathcore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having grown with metalcore, kind of, that automatically came natural for me when I write.
Sweet. All right. Well, in that case, we have some musical recommendations. We have some albums that I'm very familiar with, some artists I'm very familiar with. Some of them we've had the honor of hosting on the show at the very, very beginning of the Anatomy Crosscast, formerly the Anatomy Podcast. But it just ended up being more friendly, the Crosscast part, right? So then modernizing and kind of reflecting upon all of that, I think the last question I want to ask to both of you would be, what lessons have you learned as a musician being involved in music so far, right? And especially in the fine-tuned niche of your circumstance, being where you are on a rather isolated island when you're not working with people inside your circle at Malta. It's like you gotta go foreign, right? But it's a little bit difficult to do that. What are some lessons that you've learned about being a musician, and what lessons, like how do those lessons play into what you'd be teaching maybe the future of Malta with its respective up and coming bands?
Don't be a musician.
No. On a more serious note, I think this typical banter between me and him. It's standard. No. In my case, I think it's two things in principle. So the first off, again, it might sound cheesy, but it keeps on driving us as a band. And again, as cheesy as it might sound, the first one is, honestly, sometimes you have to dream big. Like, if you just get stuck on the concept of the limitations, but I still have to pay for a flight ticket to get to play, blah 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 blah, it will get you nowhere in reality. So ultimately you have to invest. We know what we're up against. We are ready to kind of like invest into it and dream big. I mean, like Jack was explaining with the whole how we got in touch with Shadow of Intent, for example.
Even Cabal.
And exactly. Like it was something that 99% it would have probably been ignored. We just said, fuck it, let's do it. And we got to a point where we're on friendly terms with the band. We played with them. We hopefully plan to play with them again in the future, hopefully. The same thing happened with Cabal, for example. Like we got them over to Malta. They played with us. We played with them, and they played with us locally. Even in my case, like I hosted them over at my apartment. I never organized anything of the sort. But roughing it out, and we actually managed to do it, and as I was saying before, it's a good opportunity for networking. It's a good opportunity to ultimately meet other musicians who are just as much a human being as much as you are.
Yes.
So in reality, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to enjoy the hell out of it. And ultimately, we're just human beings, man. So you just enjoy it.
Absolutely. And the thing is, too, reflecting upon your statement as far as being ambitious and dreaming big, another way of, I could say it or relate to it, is just even with starting the show, guys. Like, when the first couple bands that we got on were Signs of the Swarm, technically, Distant, technically, Worm Shepherd, the Stygian Complex, lots of U.S. local bands, but plenty of bands in distant lands, for lack of a better term, no pun intended. Sometimes it just came down to not having the social wall and daring to inquire with some of the musicians that you've been following for a long time, have been listening to a long time. And for me, I mean, I currently have like 50 bands waiting in queue that I've reached out to and inquired for the show. And I just never stop. It's kind of an issue at this point with 4 co-hosts or with 4 different personalities hosting the show, and it's like, hey, we don't have time for all these bands, and then you also want to do a session a month where it's all of us talking by ourselves together. it has become a little bit complicated for our current process, but honestly, I've just continued to reach out to bands, have a bit of gusto with it. I even send bands voice messages sometime like, hey, I'm Sean Cross from the Anatomy Crosscast. Recently saw you guys. You were recommended by Instagram. I've been following you for a long time. Would you like to jump on my show in the near future and become one of the many, like getting closer to one of the first 100 bands to jump on the show, tell your story in a more intimate way? Boom, see how they respond. I've had a lot more bands on higher tiers saying yes than I ever thought possible. And it's all because I dared. I dared to inquire with them. I dared to ask these questions and try to see if they might be interested. And then boom, I mean, I'm not charging them money yet to be on the show, or, you know, we might try to organize a tip system in the future to where it's like, if you actually like the show, like $3 or $5 per session, that's better than not making any money whatsoever. Doesn't take too much money out of their wallet, wherever they may be. And that stuff really, that's just the beginning, right? But it's always about dreaming big. It's about being ambitious, because then people will see that ambition kind of bubbling and smoking and bellowing like fog off of you. And then you have more people, I think, in your orbit who then kind of feed off of that ambition and become more ambitious themselves. The more that you dream big, the more that other people will start lucidly dreaming alongside you. And that isn't to allude to delusion, but it's meant to inspire, you know. I think that's the most important part about networking and getting in touch with these musicians, especially you guys. I never would have imagined that I would be talking with a band from an island at the center of the Mediterranean Sea, encircled by all these other countries, or that we would talk with a band last year called Eden Adversary. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They're from Malaysia. Really good blackened, like very blackened deathcore. They all wear like Oni masks and stuff. Never in my life would I thought that I'd be hosting a session with them and basically doing lyrical dissection for an album that hosted and featured all of these other very important artists and vocalists from the Malaysian, Java, Indonesian scene. It's insane. But it all starts with that ambition. It all starts with that passion and that authentic love for wanting to connect with people. Whatever the connection is for, that doesn't really matter. But as long as you're reaching out and wanting to tell these stories, and wanting to tell these stories in a less clickbait, like, when's the next tour? Like, no. That's cool and all, but we also want to learn about the people behind it and get more personal with them. I think that's the most important part about this show so far. But not to toot the Anatomy Crosscast's own horn too much, but for now, then, with you guys needing to do your final rehearsal performance before you guys prepare to perform here pretty soon, I do believe that will be the conclusion for now of the Anatomy Crosscast and its first date session with Haine. Next time, for that third and final date, I think we will be looking to talk with the lyricist of Fertile Void, talk about any major lyrical themes behind the record, lyrically dissect it, have that kind of, well, day 12 insight as far as the context, and then that will be the first date session. But, gentlemen, thank you for stopping by. This has been the Anatomy Crosscast, and we will see you all for that final chunk sometime in the near future. Until then.
Welcome back. It's been a little bit. It's been a little bit since we did our first session recording with Haine to promote their debut full-length album, Fertile Void. But we are back. We are back after a long, like, not a long time, but like just long enough to where it's just been some time, you know? So we are back, and I think it's safe to say that now we kind of just get into all the band questions, right? And today we're going to have, you know, Claudio and Nate go ahead and depersonalize. Claudio and Jack, actually, sorry. We're going to have Claudio and Jack kind of depersonalize and answer the more clickbait questions about Haine. Or about Haine, not Haine, Haine. A band from the island of Malta, tucked away in the Mediterranean at the epicenter between so many different countries from ancient history. Like it's insane. But starters, gentlemen, how are we doing?
We're doing good, man. We finally did the launch of the album, like the first launch show. So now we had some time to rest,
Yes.
except for this guy, because in the meantime he just got operated. He had to have surgery in his knee, so he's staying strong and he's still here today as well.
Good.
No, but we've had time to like come down a bit from that launch show. So here we are again.
Here we are again. I like it. So, we kickstart the questionnaire of depersonalization as if we are asking Haine as a being, as a singular sentience. Where did the name Haine come from?
So originally we were always looking for something like specifically one word. We wanted to be kind of creative with the name, but at the same time, like, keep it minimalistic as much as possible. And then just through a very easy, quick search on a couple of basic words and like doing translations, checking here and there, we stumbled across basically names as hate in French. When that got translated, we kind of read it out, and we read it out incorrectly in French, and we said, awesome, Haine, we like it. It's close to heinous, kind of, which basically there lies the hatred in the name. It goes along with what we want to go to musically. We like the way that the name kind of, you can pronounce it differently, although a lot of people have totally different pronunciations on or takes on how to say the name.
Yeah.
As you might have realized. But we like the wordplay with it. So technically speaking, it should be said N, which is the proper French pronunciation of the word. However, we like the way Haine sounded. As I said, it's close to heinous. And so basically that's the origin of the name.
Sweet. Yeah, I like that. I was totally expecting for Haine to be a word translated and then converted from English to Maltese or like your more local language. And I was like, drum roll, like what does it mean in Maltese? But French is also really cool, you know, being that you guys are at the epicenter of so many other cultures. There are so many opportunities for you to utilize surrounding languages and languages from these surrounding countries. So what had you navigating or gravitating towards French?
No, it just happened by coincidence. We just were looking at a couple of words. We like wanted to check out translations, how they sound. As you said, I mean, Malta, being from Malta and having so many influences from different cultures, we can get quite accustomed, like, with easy languages or like even a number of languages more rather than easy. So we were just looking around, trying to find out which one suits our back then likes. And that fit like perfectly. The moment we stumbled across that, we were like, awesome. We're super comfortable with that thing. People seem to like it, and it works. It's like one short word. There's nothing way too fancy.
Yeah.
And having it a short one word is also like, somehow it works also for logos.
Okay.
So you don't have to have this huge, enormous logo. One, it's what, 2, 4, 5 syllables, five letters. If easier, it makes life easier, and you can get as well more creative at the same time with potential logos. So that helped a lot as well.
There you go. Sweet. So now we have the explanation behind the name. sometimes one of the most clickbait questions a band could receive, but there are a couple of occasions to where whether the name be of coincidence or whether the band name itself be like 5 different words. So it's like, how did that assembly come together? Well, that's the difference between understanding, for example, my first name, my first legal name being Sean. Like, where did that come from? And well, I am the second edition of being named after Sean Connery, the original actor for James Bond. So like stories like that just add a little bit more character. They're naturally going to add a little bit more character. So next would be asking, what do you guys think separates Haine from other bands in the deathcore community?
Want to go at it?
Yeah.
So, I think it's primarily it's the fact that we try and strive in the sense that we don't limit ourselves to strictly like formula deathcore going into music writing particularly. We come from different backgrounds, like we had explained before. Like we have influences from metalcore, we have influences from death metal, we have influence from MySpace deathcore, like we had discussed. Even like Conrad and Chris, they came from a more kind of like groove metal kind of infused with some death metal origins as well. Conrad used when he was younger, he used to play with a full-on death grind kind of band as well. So we all put into it a lot of different influences, and I think it comes out also in the songwriting. One of the things that we luckily get good feedback about is the fact that the thing that I like is that it's not your generic kind of deathcore. And we kind of like enjoy that, and we actually use it to our advantage even in music writing. Like me and him, we have this is silly. We have constant arguments when we're writing music together. Like we cannot write music in one spot together. We have to do it always like at home separately, kind of. We come up with ideas. We just bounce off things to each other.
But we're always on the same wavelength.
Exactly, but we always know what the ultimate aim of where we want to get at. And nowadays, after all these years, we've come to a better understanding of what he likes, what I like, how we can infuse that. And ultimately that comes out a lot in our style, in our music, I think. So that is one of the very particular things that I think makes us stand out a bit differently to other bands. Another thing which is also very important for us is as well Chris's voice. He is not your usual kind of deathcore vocalist, so we don't particularly go on the ultra low gutturals or like the pig squeals and stuff like that. Like Chris has this very
Joe Bad from Fit for Autopsy.
Exactly, he has that kind of like vibe from Joe Badalado from Fit for an Autopsy. So it also relates as well to his more groove metal kind of influences. He has an obsession with Pantera, for example, as well. Pantera, Gojira. Exactly. And those voices are exactly that. It's a very outright blunt kind of voice. You have your technique, you develop on that technique, but it's kind of more heartfelt in a certain way. And we particularly write music as well that fits also that kind of voice, which helps us not be excessively too generic, kind of, let's put it like that, in the way we write music as well. Because ultimately, if you have
super slow, heavy breakdown, but you can't have the vocals to back it up.
Exactly. It doesn't
do it justice.
It doesn't do it justice, exactly. Though at the same time, that gives us also the flexibility of actually be a bit more creative and like push the boundary a bit further. So I think those two things primarily.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So then, afterwards, right, you're mentioning that with your vocalist's interest and fascination in bands like Pantera, where it's a lot more, like, you know, respect, walk, what do you say? Like, there's a lot more hoarseness in there. It takes a lot more chain smoking of entire packs of Marlboro cigarettes to kind of get to that point, and then you kind of wash that down with some cowboy coffee. Vocal spectrums like that, I can definitely admit, have always gravitated me more. And you know, in the moment, right? The fact that I'm able to do that now, because I've been able to navigate in my vocal journey through getting those more hoarse, more strained, more pain vocal spectrums in without hurting myself. Like, I could do this entire interview in this more harsh voice if I could. Like, if it was digestible. Because over time I just figured out how to crack that code. Bands like Paleface Swiss, bands like Pantera, bands like Strangled or Orphan before there was various controversy and they were apparently stealing instrumentals from Peeling Flesh. I don't know, for me, I know that it's always spite. That's a big example of spite, you know. Spite, go motherfucker! Like, it just sounds like someone's going insane in the vocal booth when they're doing that, but in a sense that doesn't focus too much on vocal Olympics. And also, in my opinion, it's, you know, going back to Viscera, right? Jamie Graham definitely does that, but he kind of mixes like Sam Carter from Architects and Johnny Hawkins from Nothing More. He brings all that together and then just makes it heavier because of his seasoning and his experience with Silosis and Heart of a Coward. But I always just gravitate towards those bands. And not only that, but I do think that it's more digestible if you have heavy music, to where despite the techniques that they're using, they're also well articulated. So absolutely, bravo to that. And I do remember hearing bits and pieces of all those different vocalists that we have now mentioned. So now, something that I think is important to everybody, right, is the for fans of mindset. When people are plugging into your social medias, you know, eventually they're going to see for fans of Viscera and like 7 other different bands, depending on the time. And for me personally, with the music that I'm writing, it might even be like a song by song. So it's like, Error is for fans of Defamed, A Night in the Abyss, and a couple others in there. And then the next song, Deliberate Deliverance, will be for fans of Ingested, Xenobiotic, Ginger, Paleface, and Spite. Just with how much energy there is, but how much of, you know, those newer vocal styles that I'm being able to implement will be integrated. So I want to think of Haine, right, as being an individual. Like, let's continue that analogy. But let's talk about lineage, right? For fans of could easily allude to a father-mother relationship. They smacked together, had the love affair, you know, that's always the joke, and then Haine was born. So if we could begin assembling a family tree for Haine, as it's never been discussed before, maybe it's a little bit too personal, for Haine as a single person broken among 5. If there was a lineage, and if there was a mother and father band that smacked together, got groovy, and made Haine, for starters, what would those 2 bands be?
Whitechapel?
I think I can answer that question quite easily, as well from the origin of how we wanted to go about writing music. But it will be, of course, I think you're alluding also to the fact that there is progression in the whole process. But how it all started was Whitechapel meets At the Gates. That's the primary, like, idea of how we wanted it to be.
And then I think when I was introduced in the band and I started contributing to the writing, it was Fit for an Autopsy meets Die Artist Murder.
Yeah.
Interesting. So definitely some affairs going on, some kind of scandalous relationships going on behind the scenes, and therefore not only do you have like the original parent bands, but then you have two others, and they're like, okay, but which is it? Is it our child or is it our child? And it's like, it's everyone's child. And then Haine was born. All right, I like that. It seems that despite the intentions of the scene, Whitechapel, for example, seems to get around a lot, right? Especially when it comes to new and upcoming deathcore bands. Lots of child support going around. Like,
rightfully so.
So then afterwards, really, we've established some of the basic information about Haine as a sentient being. And in reference to this session, I think it would be a lovely time to go ahead and go under the skin of Fertile Void. So, we kickstart this conversation like we have many others in the past, in which we try to enter into an imaginary scenario. In the past, it's been a book that you find in a library, or a movie that you find in a blockbuster, even though most of them don't exist anymore. Some people have, like Dane Evans of To the Grave, decided to reimagine the album cover and the album itself as a interpretive piece of graffiti on a random wall in some Sydney or Perth, Australia alley, right? Just a tag, like someone just tagged the entire album on a wall, and then it's up to you to figure out why they did that or what the story is behind it. So, if Fertile Void was a different creative medium other than an album, in the opinion of the two people in call acting as one, what creative medium would Fertile Void be instead of an album?
It would definitely be a book.
Okay.
It will definitely be a story of a book, and there's a whole explanation behind it, which also comes into play with the concept of the album. So unless you want to ask that later on, I can either go into it now or I can go into it later on.
Right. Absolutely. So of course then we have that book, and most likely it's just in a library just to keep things a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe the surroundings feel a little bit more safe because of it. Or maybe it's buried in the woods somewhere and you're on an adventure, you're on a quest, Indiana Jones style, because you're finding about bits and pieces of the Fertile Void, and you're like, what's the Fertile Void? What is this? And certain archaeologists are like, well, it's buried on the island of Malta under one of the graves of the great kings. And you're like, what the hell? Like, why am I going after this? Like, why am I going after the Fertile Void? That kind of sounds like just someone's corpse, really. But then you piece it together, and maybe the album cover, maybe that face kind of buried under vines and stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Maybe the book just kind of looks like a Bible, okay? But nonetheless, it's important for all books in the modern day and age, let alone back in the day, to have something on the back. So let's just say it's an old, kind of dusty, crusty leatherback book. It's buried under one of the great kings of Malta, one of the many famous people over there, just to kind of give it some oomph, right? Some legitimacy, some importance. And then maybe it's buried and they have it like right here under their hands, and you have to like kind of lift their crunchy, bony hands and to get the book. But then maybe there's a note tucked into the hard book cover, and this is a summary. This is meant to explain and gently guide you into the contents of Fertile Void, just like we have summaries on the back of a book to introduce you to the narrative. If there was, like, what would be on this piece of kind of withered old note paper to explain the album and give a overarching thesis on what the album's about?
All right, so that's quite a very descriptive kind of way how to see it, and I love it. So to go into the main concept of what the album is and what the theme around the album is, I think the cover actually starts already pointing out a lot of features about what the theme of the album is. That's why we went down with the direction with that album. And primarily there are two things in the album cover which are super important. It is, like you rightly mentioned, it is the face. There's a certain sense of anguish, there's a certain sense of pain and suffering in the features of the face, surrounded by the crown of thorns. And that crown of thorns is one of the very particular things that we wanted in our cover, because it represents a certain sense of circularity. And that crown itself is crucial to the track listing, to the story behind the album, the whole theme of the album. So this part I might carry on for quite a while. I'm just giving you a small warning.
You're good.
So the main concept of the album and the name of the album, Fertile Void, is a psychology context. It's a psychology context in itself. So me and Chris being primarily the one who carries out all the lyric duties, and I help and I give input as well in the lyrics, we were at a phase in our life where through our different journeys, through our different struggles, me and Chris had a couple of discussions and we realized that we were kind of like going through quite similar experiences in life. And it wasn't the easiest kind of phase in your life, but we realized over a coffee and a cigarette that like, fuck, we're at the same kind of similar point. What are we going to do about it? Without any kind of problems, I will admit that I was at a phase in my life where I was going through therapy, and the concept of Fertile Void actually came out from one of my therapy sessions. And I instantly kind of, it's difficult to say fell in love, but because it's not the easiest kind of thing. But I originally always liked the concept of the fertile void.
Intriguing.
Exactly, I found it intriguing. That's the correct word. Because it is a stage where you are in quite a bit of a vacuum, kind of. You don't know what direction you want to go in your life, or you don't know this particular example of, I don't know, this phase in your life. You don't know where you want to go with it. It can go in a million different directions, but the fact is, you don't know. And there are two ways how to see that kind of vacuum. It is either an opportunity for you to really go down the spiral and you can fucking spiral out of control with not knowing what direction you'll take, or else it might actually be a very good opportunity for you to embrace that vacuum feeling, for you to actually start making a plan of action, kind of on like, okay, I'm in this very uncomfortable phase. I want to do this, I want to do that, I will aim to do this, I will aim to achieve that in that way. So realistically speaking, it is a point in time where it's a very good occasion to actually grow from. And me and Chris were discussing this whole concept around it, and we instantly were intrigued by it, and we decided to go with that as a concept, or the thematical kind of concept of the album. We went a step further as well, and so we took that fertile void and we actually researched the whole concept around it. It originally comes from what's called the contact cycle. This is all Gestalt psychotherapy, and the contact cycle is primarily, in theory, it's 8 steps which all go into a cycle. And here I make reference back to the crown of thorns, the whole circularity around it. And it, in very practical terms, it is just, it can be as close to something as mundane as possible to the most complex kind of task ever. So just to make kind of a bit of irony out of it, it might be just you going to work. So in the first step, it's you wake up and you say, I have to go to work. Then it goes to I don't know, I have to start preparing, I have to go shower, I have to do this, blah, blah, blah. So there's the whole step around it. And the fertile void, which is one of the final steps, is, for example, the point where you got to work, you did what you aimed to do, you got to that point, and now what shall I do next?
Right.
It might be a very easy solution. It might be a very uncomfortable kind of solution. So we decided to go with that whole concept.
Okay.
Adding on to it, we did one extra step, and we kind of crafted a whole story out of it, which consists of primarily two entities, which are what we call the apparition and the protagonist. So the protagonist is, it can be me, it can be you, it can be anyone. Whoever wants to delve into the lyrics, whoever wants to kind of like assimilate that kind of body. And the apparition, which is the first song as well, it is this kind of entity which is speaking to yourself at the same time. So it's, you know, like it can be me and my thoughts, me and my other self. There's always this toing and froing, which is in reality it's quite normal because it's you with your own thoughts. And we wanted to create a story which is kind of like the protagonist having this constant toing and froing with the apparition and going through those different 8 to 10 phases of the contact cycle. Adding on to that, we kind of drafted a tentative kind of story where the protagonist, throughout the journey of the contact cycle, realizes that he comes to a point where he actually realizes that the apparition, basically him talking to himself. It's not a different entity. It's not something exterior to him. It's just him in his own world. And that's where the face of the cover as well comes in, because upon that realization, basically realized that he was facing himself. And he was facing himself in that whole circular contact. And the thorns, that's where they come in as well. He was facing himself in this kind of struggle and in this kind of situation. And then the last song, he's laughing because I warned you it might be long, but yeah. And so basically the last song then kind of ends on a positive note in the whole journey, however with kind of like this cliffhanger which never gets resolved. And that was done on purpose because the aim is that you never complete one cycle and that's it, it's done. Once you complete the cycle, it's back to the next cycle.
I see.
So there's that kind of circularity, there's that continuous kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
And that's where the cliffhanger comes in as well.
And why the song is called Death Spiral.
Exactly. The song is called That Spiral, which is the aim, exactly like Jack is saying, because one thing dies and you start over the spiral again.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Good
Like, so you would say then that fertile void is meant to reflect upon the idea of cycles, eras, points in your life to where either you are truly at odds with an external force, or you're trying to manifest it as an external force, separate yourself from these conflicting points in your life, and instead you are creating a world, you're creating a fertile void for conflict within yourself in the name of self-reflection. After all, when you're in therapy and you are learning new things about yourself, you're trying to become a better person, a better version of yourself than you were yesterday. Naturally, when you're in therapy, sometimes it helps to construct a narrative where you and your issues are separate. You're trying to separate yourself from the apparition, or as humanity continues to do, as we continue to sophisticate ourselves yet enslave others or oppress others, depending on where you are in the world. You could be a king, you could be one of the Rothschilds, and your entire niche in life then is to oppress. But eventually, no matter if you're the world's greatest supervillain and you are one of the Rothschilds or BlackRock or Vanguard, or you're a globalist, or maybe you are on the other side of that, maybe you are the oppressed, no matter what, there will always be a fertile void of thoughts, prayers, contradictions that almost obligate you, if you are sane and if you are accountable, to reflect within yourself. And at the end of the day, more often than not, all of our fertile voids personally end up being battles with ourselves, and we end up becoming our greatest enemy, our own greatest enemy. But most importantly, it's about finding out how many of those enemies, as they reincarnate, that you can conquer. How many of those apparitions that you can bring peace to and then send to the other side, as ghost hunters, paranormal investigators do these days anyway. The metaphor then to me, and as I'm interpreting it, of the apparition is phantom versions of you that you're trying to keep external from yourself, and therefore you're talking to phantoms, you're talking to ghosts that are meant to represent former incarnations of yourself, but really you're just trying to make peace in the fertile void in your own mind and navigate these psychscapes and do your best to help these former versions of you, these lesser pieces of lesser versions of you. You're trying to help them make peace, that way they can move on. And maybe if they are as complex as to being called the apparition, or if they are as complex as to becoming separate beings from you, well, you can't exactly hold them all within yourself anymore. So then you have to separate yourself from them, distinguish yourself, and just continue improving as a person. So, to attempt to compact all of what I just said, Fertile Void is meant to be the reflections of members of Haine from the island of Malta. It is meant to be a reflection of those members and certain parts in their life to where their inner complications, inner turmoil, inner conflicts became so complicated that it ended up being better to regard their inner turmoils as separate phantoms, and therefore we have the apparition and the protagonist. I think that's like the most I can compact that, but I like this so far. I like this. So, then, in regards to that, you said the first track was quoted as the apparition. So, let's go ahead and pull up the track listing, or at least I will over on my end. Let's see. And then, yeah, so we'd start out with track 1, the apparition. Of course, we understand that this is meant to be the antagonist, whether the viewer, the listener, the reader, I guess, for this book, wants to regard the apparition as separate from them or not. Well, the apparition is the antagonist. So, that's a very, very, it's meant to be interpreted. It's an interpretive narrative compacted into an album. But let's go ahead and attempt to get a little bit more personal with this, if you guys are open to it. And I say that by asking for you during the writing of this album, and then between you and the other member, I do believe you said Chris, you guys were having very similar inner turmoils happening at the time. So for you personally, Claudio, at the time of writing your own version of this and having your own interpretation of this album then, of the Fertile Void, who at the time was the apparition for you?
The apparition for me So first off, I really want to congratulate you on how you interpreted the whole concept. Well done. A really good rendition of what we were saying. For me, the apparition was basically when the whole concept was starting, like I had explained, was just this a bit wiser version of myself. Like, you know how I don't know, it's like when you're going through something which particularly destabilizes you, you know, it's like these cartoons when you have the small good angel and the little devil on the side.
Yeah.
Which in reality are all different aspects of you. To me, it was the wiser version of myself, trying to guide me on what makes sense the most, on how to tackle any of my issues which I was tackling at that point in time, or anything which I was going through that time, which, you know, like subconsciously you're aware that I might be fucking up a bit over here, but let's see how things go. And that little kind of voice inside your head which tells you like, dude, you're really not in a good place to actually tackle this issue, for example, right now. So to me, the apparition was actually that voice which was always kind of like telling me, maybe this is not the best solution for the time being, or maybe this is not the best course of action on how you tackle an issue. So to me, that was the apparition.
Fair enough. Okay. And one thing I would like to do too, and to introduce, because this was not exactly in the emailed questionnaire, but this is meant to improve the substance and the quality of these Under the Skin sessions going forward. If you're able to, and of course we can edit accordingly if we have to take some time for you to pull up things, but song by song too, what I would love for you to do personally, being that you are navigating us through your interpretation and your version of Fertile Void, I would love for you to take out then a chunk of lyrics in the song that you think best fits, not only for the overall surface level meaning of the apparition, but for yourself and for your interpretation whilst you were writing this. If you want to, that would be fantastic, because I think what's really nice, you know, and from a marketing standpoint, is like, well, if you were to make an apparition shirt, quote, like what lyrics would you put in gold foil lettering possibly on the back of the shirt? You know, MySpace Deathcore style.
Very get some merch.
There you go. And most importantly too, whilst we're navigating through, Claudio, your interpretation and your application of Fertile Void, I want us to go ahead and do this for every song in the track listing. And I think then that people will be able to understand how this album then, that's meant to be interpreted by so many and then told and analyzed in different ways, how you ended up navigating through this and utilized Fertile Void to reflect between yourself and this wiser version of yourself. After all, my understanding getting into it was that this was meant to be solely in regards to lesser, maybe less productive versions of yourself. So I like the fact that for you, it was actually talking with a younger, maybe more seasoned version of yourself that was more confident in the timeline and in the moments that they were residing in. Very, very fascinating that you ended up then reflecting with the apparition, and the apparition was just a wiser version of yourself. I was like, whoa, that's a cool plot twist there. So for you then, in the apparition, what would be the most applicable lyric, if there are any, to you beginning to reflect with this wiser version of yourself?
Alright, so I actually, in the meantime, I pulled up one of the lyrics, which I know that Chris and we went, like I said, we were discussing this between us. we kind of made the apparition have a very specific voice in the lyrics where it kind of like properly appears. And keep in mind as well, like I was saying, the apparition, the way, at least the way I always understood it, is this kind of internal conflict with another version of myself, kind of. And so if you go through the lyrics of Insentient, which is the second song, it starts off automatically with a quote, which is the apparition talking to the protagonist.
Okay.
And the first lyric, in fact, is, this place inside your mind is your test, your way out is still out of sight. So it's that kind of like self-doubting voice, but purposefully so. Like, listen, you're not in a good shape right now. And the aim would be to make you aware that you're not in a good place, for example, and you need to actually work on it. Later on, throughout the lyrics of Insentient, then we have a whole chunk where the apparition is directly talking to the protagonist. And the lyrics are so: can you face this wasteland that is your mind? There is no other way out. Embrace the chaos and step into the abyss. In the emptiness you will find the path, fraught with violent despair. Inhale the brimstone and become one with the flame. Gaze upon me and rise again. Just something small which I can already point out was the wordplay with the gaze upon me and rise again. Because that is where it automatically kind of does that mirror effect.
Yeah.
So it's not gaze upon you or gaze upon it or whatever, it's gaze upon me, because I am reflecting where you are at, I am reflecting how you are feeling. So that specific lyric, I was always very in love with it, because it is the point also in the cycle, for example, it is the point where it's one of the cycle steps, it's recognition. So it is the recognition of what you are facing and what you are kind of in the path of starting to plan how to act upon it.
Foreshadowing.
Exactly. There is a sense of foreshadowing, and it puts the picture as well into what needs to be done at this point. So it is the recognition or the awareness that this is the current situation, this is what you have to face, let's go at it.
Fair enough. I like that. And yeah, it seems that you're just kind of navigating us through these tracks on your own. I'm not really having to say track 2 Insentient. So that's pretty cool. Now, one thing I did want to ask them about Insentient, being that Insentient seems to be about recognition, and like having that looking in the mirror moment with yourself, and you're like, oh, I thought the apparition was separate from me. Turns out it's just a wiser version of me. Aside from that, then, what was the reason that you decided to work with Andreas Bojolver as the feature for this track?
It's a bit of a more hardcore driven inspiration when it comes to the riffs of the song. You know, it's a bit more groovy, a bit more party like, which would fit Cabal's writing style. But when we talked to him, as in we're very good friends with Cabal and with Andreas, we asked him if he would like to actually feature on a part of the song, which is not what he usually does. And he was up for it, you know, because he got to experiment some new techniques with some new patterns, not always, you know, the fast rapping. So we just told him, listen, we like your voice, we want something different that's gonna really stand out on the track, which is totally different from Chris. You have all the liberty, here are the lyrics, do whatever you want with it. So, and he enjoyed it as well, because it was I remember him telling us it was a bit more, say, challenging, because it was a specific section which he's not totally used to in terms of the rhythm of the song.
I see. Awesome. And sometimes it ends up being a more casual thing. I know that me personally, when it comes to features and collaborations, my intention being that there's money to be invested, right? Would be not only to have like, ooh, this guy from Cabal, a really, really cool heavy band otherwise that has their own style, mixing Thal and various other subgenres of heavy music. They're just doing something really special, so we wanted to work with them. We've been friends with them for a long time. But for me, I kind of want to take the next step and up, like, not to look down upon anyone who's done collaborations a certain way so far, but like, I think it'll be really, really fun to not only get certain musicians to collaborate on certain songs, but to like incorporate fictional depictions of them in the art, do collaboratory merch drops and stuff. So for example, Insentient with Andreas from Cabal, like the Cabal logo, Haine, Cabal, Haine, Cabal, Haine, and then having like not only that face that we see already on Fertile Void, but maybe a reversed and inverted white static noise, just like a whole bunch of different noise to really turn it into something else. You're looking at yourself, this person's looking at themselves, but it definitely is a different thing. Adding some purple to that as per the album cover, and then boom, Insentient as a long sleeve or something like that. So and that's definitely something that I'm trying to do in the near future. The next song that we're writing is going to be a collaboratory effort. We have yet to figure out who's going to be featuring on it, but for whomever does feature on it, not only do we have the intention of getting them on, but like, I look forward to filming a drastically different environment, music video wise, from what we're doing for the rest of the video. For example, if it's Derek Connolly and Mythful, having him film a little excerpt of what looks like him in hell, and he's like representing Satan, and as per the context of the song, he's like, whoa, you know, I, the adversary, the enemy of God, even find an issue with this. And, you know, he guides you through that, but then he makes references to his other albums and stuff. I look forward to doing that, and that's just like one example. But, awesome. So, we move forward then in the track listing with a song that you guys have made a music video for. This was one of two that you would make a music video for, or some type of visualizer over on your YouTube channel for. The song, track 3, would be Blood Moon. So, we kind of dive then into, thus far, some uncharted territory as far as context. What is the surface level meaning for Blood Moon?
So Blood Moon in particular, it's kind of like it still goes along with the concept of awareness, which is still linked to Insentient in the stage of the cycle. So the theme here is Chris actually had a very particular theme, which is the Dark Night of the Soul, not night like the Dark Knight of Batman. It's the evening night.
Yeah.
So it was that particular stage which describes a period of time during one's life, kind of where like everything seems hopeless. So the protagonist just had this discussion with the apparition, but is still in so much shock and is still in so much kind of like the early stages of awareness that everything seems fucking hopeless. Knows that the future is kind of still quite perilous, and he realizes that this is just the beginning kind of the journey. So it's the beginning of him taking action on what he needs to take action on. And as one of the lyrics stand in the song itself, now the picture is finally clearer, and he needs to act. So that was the concept behind Blood Moon.
Okay, cool.
Which is the third track.
Yeah. And then as far as quoting any lyrics specifically, what would you think is the best lyric stanza to quote when you're trying to, like, say, same thing, you know, merch, you're making merch for it, you're like, what's a line that stands out? What would be that line?
And in fact, it's the one that we actually used for our long sleeve, which we have on sale right now. So part of it, part of the whole visual of the merch, it has this specific lyric, which is, "I reign supreme inside this hell. I'm in denial. I'm in distress. It's all in my head. It's all in my mind. I'm but a mortal here. I am no god in disguise." Which, if you remember from the song, it's the part where there is that like more polyrhythmic kind of section, where the song quiets down a bit.
Yeah, hell yeah. Okay, sweet. Track 4 then would be Absolution. This is like something that's very confident of itself and requires that title. What's going on with this one?
So Absolution, and also as the track itself, like sonically kind of emits, it's a bit of a, in very huge inverted commas, it has a bit of a more happier kind of feeling. So, and that is because this is the next step in the cycle. It is the step which is known as mobilization. So basically this is where the protagonist has finally, metaphorically speaking, has actually started to run and started to take action on finding a way out of his own mind, kind of, let's put it like that.
Okay.
So it kind of represents the still traumatizing effects from where you were at upon you realize where you're at, but in a positive kind of way, in a slightly positive kind of way, you start actually taking action and start the journey of the whole cycle itself.
Okay.
In fact, part of the lyrics, Chris says a couple of times where he says, move faster, I need to get out of my mind. And crushed by the world. And the concept is that, so you realized where you're at, you started to take action on it, so you need to move faster. You need to move faster so you actually achieve what your ultimate aim is to achieve. And there is that kind of a bit of a better feeling because you finally are acting upon what you wanted to act upon. So, it's like that self-sustaining positive approach.
Okay, sweet. And then what is a good lyric to quote for this song?
So it's the one I just mentioned. So basically there's the chorus itself, the ending of the chorus goes, move faster, I need to keep moving while I'm crushed by the world. Which actually represents that I realize where I'm at, I am actually working on it, I need to move faster despite all the problems and despite everything that is trying to push me down, I need to keep moving.
Sweet. Track 5 then would be Hindrance. This seems to be kind of contradicting to the confidence that was in Absolution, the upbringingness, the positivity. So what's going on with Hindrance? What changes?
Yeah, and even like again, so from the audio part, Hindrance is a different song. It's a bit of a sadder, a bit more morose kind of feeling song.
It's a downer.
With exactly, it's a slightly downer, and it actually quite represents where I was at with my life at that point in time. But it has those very heavy elements in it as well. So in context, and it's a very realistic way to understand a course of action as well. You know how at sometimes you actually start working on something, on a problem or whatever it may be. At first there is all that enthusiasm where you're like, fuck yes, I'm finally doing something about it. And like in the early to mid phases of that course of action, something fucks you up.
That's clarity.
Exactly. And that is what this song is about. It takes on the approach of action in the contact cycle. So you're kind of like engaging with the whole process, experimenting with the whole process, and following the events of where the previous song was at, trying to find a way out of his own mind, out of his own problems, out of his own struggles. This is where he starts to think about a plan on what he has to do, but finds all those problematics which take you just a bit, you know, like that whole process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And as much as you're still doing 1 step forward, that 1 step back kind of like fucks you up, man. And that is what this song kind of embodies.
I see. Okay. And if we have yet to quote lyrics from the song that are meant to stand out, which ones would?
So in this case, in this particular song, there is one lyric that I genuinely love, because it embodies in this struggle, in this phase, the discussion between the protagonist and the apparition. So while I'm going through this problem, I ask my own apparition, kind of, and the lyric goes like this. Long have I been lost in shadows, my mind has been torn in two, trapped in this world of despair, I need you to guide me through. Which it actually goes to show, like, I'm having these issues, I'm having these troubles, I'm trying to work on them, fucking help me out here. You know, which is a very kind of honest interaction that anyone has with himself through any kind of difficult situation. And that's it.
Sweet. All right. Now, the song that would then introduce me to Haine, I still have a video tucked away. It's just, working Subway and having to board ride there, board ride back. Dealing with life recently, I haven't been able to get to uploading it, but that's kind of where the front to back session comes in as far as I'm concerned. We have The Lake featuring Ben Dorr. So, what is the purpose behind this song? What is the surface level purpose?
So the song, this song is a very particular one in the whole track listing as well, because this song actually embodies the contact part of the contact cycle. The contact is where you're kind of open for engagement, where like meetings take place, kind of, and exactly, and the track is titled "The Lake" specifically because upon this whole journey, upon this whole course of action, Lake embodies a part where in this journey the protagonist actually sees his own reflection in a lake. Upon seeing his reflection, he realizes that everything that he's been searching for throughout this whole journey, in reality, was a reflection of himself. It's a very abstract kind of concept, but the way we wanted to portray it was that upon reflecting upon himself, he realizes that these troubles I've been having, these issues I've been going through, are all a reflection of what I am, of what I am going through, of what I need to do. And that kind of like blurred line between reality and fantasy, kind of like it's where you actually realize that shit, this is me that I've been dealing with, kind of. And that's what is embodied in the song in reality.
Sweet. Yeah, and of course, Ben Dorr is as talented as a vocalist as he is. His reputation, whether in Hollow Prophet or Shadow of Intent, has reigned supreme for a great many years now. Many people look back to either the Scum Prophet EP between him and when Dickie Allen was first starting out Scumfuck. he's a fantastic vocalist, and I'm sure that very similar to these other connections that you've made with bands that we've had on the show and bands that we have yet to host on the show, but through opportunities in the UK or Europe on tour, I'm sure you guys have met a lot of different folks, and maybe Bendor is one of them. I know I would love to have the pleasure of meeting him in person myself. But to not toot his own horn, or toot his horn. That took me a second.
Actually,
Too much, right? What was the reason you guys ended up deciding to have Bendor dump?
I think this
Jump on
ties
this
as well
track.
with what... Excuse me?
What was the reason you had him jump on this track?
I think it's a similar reason why we wanted Andreas on the track, because when listening to a feature, at least from my experience, it can either be that the feature sounds so similar to your own vocalist that you can't really tell apart who's who, and it doesn't actually shine through, or it's so different that it doesn't really make sense with the song. It's like, alright, they just got a feature, for you it sounds great, but it's too different. And I think with both Andreas and especially with Ben, there was the opportunity to find the middle ground and having a feature where both vocalists, and in this case Ben, will shine through his own, but it's not as totally different that it sounds weird, or it sounds like I don't really know how to explain it, but I think I got the point across.
there is the similarity between what you are doing yourself. However, it still stands out as something which is contrasting to what you're doing within the same concept of the whole track.
I like that. Okay.
And we actually chose Ben as well for this song in particular because it is a bit more of a kind of like deathcore with some symphonic elements kind of song. We wanted to have a track like that. Ben fits perfectly in that kind of vibe as well. And to anticipate one of your questions, we actually reserved the highlights of the lyrics specifically for the part that Ben was going to be singing, which is the reflection that I was just discussing. In fact, the lyrics that Ben sings go something along these lines. In the depths of the lake, our souls become one. As we dive deeper, the water surrounding in its icy claws in this place, I'm no longer alone. For the shape I pursued has been myself all along. This is what I was searching for, to become whole again. Which exactly explains the whole concept of the mirror, the reflection upon the lake. He noticed that he's battling his own self. And same thing like Jack was explaining with what happened with Andreas. We told him like, listen, we have these lyrics, feel free to change things around as you wish. We just have this concept that we would like. You have absolute liberty on what kind of vocal range you want to use, whether highs, whether lows, whether a mix-up of everything. And he just came out, presented us with this belter of a vocal track.
Well, technically we got something else in the beginning.
Yes, that's true. But we have to stay hush about that. Because we had, by mistake, we had received future unreleased material, which then once it got released, he was doing another vocal track with another band. And when we received it, we're like, that's fucking killer. But he sent it by mistake. And then he sent us our actual files.
This doesn't sound like Haine.
And we were confused when we received them. We were like, wait, but something is
It was just
way
the
too
stems.
wrong in the lyrics.
It was just the stems, so there was no...
Exactly.
It was just the vocal stems.
And then we finally got it.
Okay. So
No,
then-
but he fully delivered.
You're
Although
good.
he fully delivered us with what he gave us as well, just as much as Andreas, and we're super thankful and lucky to have him featuring on our album.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I really like, and I'm not sure if you guys kind of pinpointed this detail out, but like, not only did Bender work really, really well as the feature for this song, but the lake in and of itself, and talking about a mirror reflection, actually unintentionally makes reference to their best album of all time, Melancholy, because that's the album cover. I love that.
Yeah. We figured this out at a later point, if I'm being honest. I remember me and Jack having a conversation once in my balcony, and we're like, Lake, Bend the Ware, Haine, our song, Melancholy.
Yeah.
And we just got to that point, and like, yeah, it works perfect.
No, I like that. It's almost as if far away in a distant land, that being Malta. It's almost as if the album cover of Melancholy was like being interpreted and told in a different way, but like it just makes, in my opinion, it just makes that album more relevant. I really think that even up until now, Melancholy is probably the best album that Shadow of Intent ever writes. Period. I really hope that they plan to embrace those roots going into the near future, but hey, we'll see. So, the next track we got is The Symbiote. And this is not exactly a character or an interpretation that has been explained before, I don't think. Unless, of course, the symbiote is meant to be a different way of explaining the protagonist. I'm not sure, but of course, Claudio, you'll be navigating me through this. So, what is the surface level understanding? What should simple brains understand about the symbiote?
So the concept of the symbiote reflects the next step in the whole cycle, which is completion. There's a sense of satisfaction and completion, or kind of like subsiding of energy in itself. As the word symbiote or symbiosis means, and as we just reflected upon the lake, we had the protagonist had an image, had a vision, had the reflection of himself. So the only course of action at this point in time is where the protagonist actually embraces and engulfs his own image. The scope of that is in order to complete the whole process of acceptance. So he actually stumbled upon his own reflection, found out a number of things about himself upon facing that reflection. Now he completely eats up that whole thing, makes it a part of himself, and uses that as his own strength, as his own tool to continue throughout the journey, which is symbiosis in itself. Right. And that's why the song was ultimately called Symbiote within the whole concept of the album.
Right. No, I like that. And really, it's the healthier part of the process. It's the point in time where you're like, you know what, this wiser version of myself, and for you, Claudio, personally, this is where you come to the realization that this wiser version of yourself isn't here to look down upon you, but to help you look towards a more productive and better future, and to become closer, maybe, to that wiser version of yourself. One could even say, I would dare argue, that in this narrative, that the wiser version of yourself could be from the future. And instead, you still look at it. You look to this wiser version of yourself as a phantom, as a ghost, something that's haunting you, but not because of history, because of the future instead. And oftentimes, I would say, not many of us really look to ghosts and phantoms as something of our future, but Christmas Carol, that's a pretty good example. The ghost of Christmas past, present, and future help Scrooge then become just a decent person. Not even like a better version of himself, but a decent person. Because then before that, within most interpretations of that narrative, of that story, well, he's just greedy, he's selfish, but he's also lonely. So that's why he lashes out in selfishness and in greed. So then, when I think of ambition and I daydream about the future, I've never personally had the experience of regarding my future self as a phantom, but maybe sometimes that's what you need to do. Maybe you need to be haunted by the potential future, by your potential futures. However, do not concern yourself and base the future off of what ifs. At least more paranoid, more panicked, more stressed what ifs. Instead, because the future is so uncertain, I think the most productive way then to reflect and discuss things with a wiser version of yourself is to just regard them as guardians instead of phantoms and ghosts. Unless, of course, you're just a bad person, and then you have some time. You need to take some time, look within yourself, and figure out if your future is going to be of dread, of torment, of pain, of suffering for you and others that deserve your respect and that you care about. For me, when it comes to thinking about the future, though, most importantly, don't base the future off of what ifs. Just figure out what you have the power to do now to make your future more prosperous. That way, for lack of a better term, just an analogy, you don't have to settle for crumbs. And as the term goes for me personally, always appreciate, never settle. Always appreciate the opportunities that come along the way. Appreciate the opportunities to learn, or maybe the more physical manifestations. Maybe a new job, a new friendship, a new relationship. Always appreciate the opportunities, but never settle. Don't compromise. If you truly feel within yourself that you are compromising on certain things, you need to figure out what you can do to compromise less. Because there are, after all, billions of us here on the planet now, all across the world. Whether it be personal connections, relationships, job opportunities, whatever it may be. You don't have to settle, but do not forget to appreciate the moment, be in the present, modernize your soul. Because if you don't, you're going to be stuck either in the past and infinitely circulating, right, as Fertile Void depicts. You'll be infinitely circulating and reflecting and kind of just worrying yourself with what's already happened in the past, or you're going to be constantly chasing after the dragon, as the analogy goes, as the saying goes. You're going to be chasing the dragon until you realize that the dragon was actually yourself.
You the whole concept, I'm happy about that.
Yeah. So then symbiosis entails, and whether it be in Marvel Comics or whatever, symbiosis is that good old handshake and deciding, you know what, you're not looking down upon me, you're not being condescending, you don't see me as a lesser version of you yourself, despite me being the more physical, more concrete version of myself, as Claudio's depiction or interpretation of Fertile Void goes. But instead, you're like, you know what? Be my teacher. Let me be my teacher and be in the present, but also make sure that in the future, do my best, do everything in my power to ensure that my future is a little bit more secure. What would be a good lyric to pluck from the symbiote regarding, maybe more specifically, this handshake, this, we should work together between you and your wiser self?
Oh, the best to represent that is the first set of lyrics in the song, when they go out quite heavily, the lyrics, where Chris says, "Accept this fate, I'm my own reflection now, broken and weak, yet somehow complete." I think that's those two lines perfectly embrace that, like you're saying, that handshake, the self-awareness that There are parts of me which are maybe incomplete. There are parts of me which are maybe are weaker than others. But somehow, having accepted this whole situation, having accepted my own reflection, having accepted my own past, having accepted my own weaknesses, I now feel more complete to actually take on the rest of the journey.
Hell yeah. And that's all that matters, is when you reach that consensus of being more confident in your future and you feel that you can navigate these certain conversations and these reflections with less panic and more confidence, that is when you are on the right track in life. Next track then would be Twisted Monuments. So, if I may, I think what I'm going to do with this one and like for the rest of the track listing is attempt to theorize upon surface level understanding with these words. So, after you and your wiser self have this handshake, you get into that sense of symbiosis. You're working together now. Twisted Monuments, to me, it's kind of like you and your wiser self are looking upon the things that you used to worship and understanding their flaws, or maybe the things that you used to love and you're understanding their flaws, you're acknowledging it, and you're like, yeah, I mean, ruins are ruins. There are ruins all over the world, and for you and Jack, like, there are not ruined archetypes and structures of architecture. Maybe not in Malta. Malta seems to be pretty sturdy, standing still. Of course, there are more ancient structures there that have been there for centuries now. But most importantly, they're not ruins yet. But there are other places in the world who aren't so lucky. There are other places and destinations in the world, like the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Sphinx over in Egypt, that weren't so lucky. That's kind of my understanding of this so far. Let's see if I need to be corrected.
You pretty much ruined my next step because it's very, very, very close. Like fucking done. Twisted Monuments, it represents the stage of withdrawal in the contact cycle. Withdrawal, there's a sense of letting go. There's some sort of like there's a bit less of an investment into what was before.
Okay.
Which I like your analogy how you understood it. So, in the context of the track itself, the traveler, the protagonist over here, is actually in the phase where, having gone through symbiosis, he starts to withdraw and let go of those bad memories that were affecting him so negatively. So this is one of the steps almost closing that cycle, and he is realizing that he is almost getting to the completion of the phase. So the fact that he embraced his own self puts him in a position where he starts thinking like, those were really bad situations, were really bad memories. They still are bad situations and they still are bad memories. However, I can now start to compartmentalize sort of in the fact that yes, these are bad memories, these are bad experiences, but that's where they were at, that's what I have gone through, and I'm at a better position or at a better place to actually get to the completion of this whole journey. And that is the context and the concept of this song. And once again, I applaud you for your interpretation of the track with just the title, because you got it right. I'm happy that you're getting the whole world.
Yeah, man, and that's the beautiful thing is when substance emerges onto the table with lyrical depth. And like it's pretty easy for me to decipher these things. I don't take too much pride in it because there are moments where I'm like absolutely wrong, and it's better to prefer to be wrong than to be like, oh yeah, I fucking know what I'm talking about. Like it's rewarding. It's mutually rewarding. So we got 2 tracks left on Fertile Void. And now, my favorite part, or one of my favorite parts, in deciding the track listing, right, is deciding to smack a title track onto the album. So, we got the title track. Fertile Void. Now, this song isn't at the tail end of the album. It's not at the beginning. It's not even really in the middle. It's near the end. So, there was obviously there was strategy. There was strategy with that, I'm sure. What was the strategy? What was the reasoning that this ended up becoming the second to last song?
So, the strategy behind it just happened quite naturally due to the fact of the whole contact cycle itself. So like I had explained before, the whole team around the album, when in one of my sessions I had heard about this Fertile Void, me being a musician, an artist, call it what you may, I obviously liked this concept of Fertile Void, and I actually started researching it, looking into it, having a proper understanding of it. Which made me realize that the Fertile Void is not the last step in the cycle itself, but it was one of the steps in the cycle which I personally resonated with a lot, because I have to admit that I struggled in that part of the cycle. It was a concept which to me it was so difficult, so unpleasant, the whole element of uncertainty. It put me in a position where I was very uncomfortable there.
Right.
However, given the fact that it's not the last step of the cycle, it's interesting. So that was the whole strategy around it. I have to admit, I was quite adamant on the fact that I would like the album to be titled The Fertile Void, and luckily for me, the rest of the guys were quite
Fertile Void.
Fertile Void.
Yeah, it's one of the main arguments we had.
But I was lucky enough that the rest of the guys embraced the whole concept. We worked out instantly, and so this time round, for example, to explain the lyrics and the context of the song, I already explained what the Fertile Void is. So
Yes.
that's pretty much it,
Yeah.
reality, in the context of the journey. But there is a sense of equilibrium, sort of, in the whole Fertile Void itself. It's a very unstable equilibrium, as weird as that might be.
No,
That's the whole concept of it. It's this uncertainty to render you certain.
there you go. Simple enough. All right, and then the last track we have is Death Spiral. Now, you did talk about this song before, and really Death Spiral, from what I understood at the very beginning, was a little bit more casual, and it's the haunting premise, despite the apparition that you're already talking with, that you're already going through this Fertile Void with. Death Spiral is the very, very panicking, very stress-inducing, depending on your perspective, premise that this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of a more critical medium of self-reflection. That's how I understood it. Like, this is not the end. This is just the beginning. But the thing is, you can use the Fertile Void almost as like a pocket dimension, a space in your psyche that you can go to. This ends up being better than prescription meds, in my opinion, because there's only so much that prescription meds can do unless you are drastically chemically imbalanced and you need medication, right? Otherwise, you have creations that help you navigate through these scenarios, and the Fertile Void just happens to be one of them. I don't know if I hit the nail on the head per se.
I have nothing to add. That's it. It's the last part. It's the last part of the cycle, which is the beginning of a new cycle, and that's how we intended it to be, the song, because that's it. It's closure, re-beginning, and the cycle starts again.
There you go.
And we actually just another detail I might add is what we did sonically with the song as well. When you listen to the album and you listen to the song, which is that spiral, we actually had a journey inside the journey itself, also sonically, where the album actually finishes off by instrument, always one instrument less in the song. So at first you have everything going on at once, including like lead guitars, and then one guitar, the rhythm guitars are out, and then the lead guitar is out, then the vocals are out, and then the bass is out, ending up with just one final ride hit from the drummer.
There you go.
And that was the whole concept, well, which kind of like represents the cycle ending up until completion, just to rehash everything again.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, then continuing upon more or less the tail end of the Under the Skin session for Fertile Void, the debut full-length album from a band tucked away in the Mediterranean Sea on the island of Malta. After listening to this album and after providing lyrical dissection, and then on top of that, as per a continuing to adjust formula with the questionnaire, right? We ended up discussing bands that were important to the DNA of making this band, let alone the album, what it is and what it was. So, then reflecting upon this album, it's out now, it's been out for some time as 2025 continues to blossom and wake up and spring approaches for the Western Hemisphere. When you think about this album, what distinguishes it from other iconic records that would end up inspiring it along the way?
I wouldn't know how to answer that. I don't think the word is how would Fertile will distinguish itself, but sort of like pays an homage to all our influences. As in, we've all been listening to music for some time, we've all been playing our instruments for some time and investing both our time and passion into it, so it's more of a connecting the puzzle pieces together and paying homage to what inspires us rather than what distinguishes us from the rest.
There you go.
I think it's also, when it comes to being able to distinguish yourself, so subjective. What I might, listen to a band that I find it distinguishing the rest of scene. It can be different for you, it can be different for Claudio. It's all subjective at the end of the day. That's how I see it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, Claudio, do you have any other commentary for that one?
No, I agree with Jack in the sense that it was never a name of distinguishing ourselves intrinsically. Kind of like we didn't want this album to be fuck you all, this is us.
Right.
We do that with integrity of what you're putting out there, kind of the way at least the way I see it. We wanted to represent our journey, we wanted to represent our artistic influences and our artistic expression in this format.
So the best way we can.
As best as our capabilities can. We're happy to have worked with the people that have helped us in achieving that as well. And we hope that it continues to be well received.
Right. There you go. Cool. So then, that would be the Under the Skin session. Boop. And that's for editing purposes. Afterwards, we're at the tail end of the session now. It took a little bit longer than we were planning to get all this piece together. But now is an opportunity, I think, for that phantom transparency that I always try, if nothing else, try to associate with me as an individual, let alone everything that I create. So, in the opinion of both Claudio and Jack from Haine, what are some stronger points of this session, or what were some stronger points of this session? What were some weaker parts of this session? That way we can continue to improve this show, in your opinion, episode by episode, following that of our debut first date session with Haine.
So as for the strong points, I actually personally I really like the fact that it goes, as you rightfully called it, the under the skin part. I love it. It's a very good opportunity because I think you do get a lot of chances to go in depth about the concepts, but still time constraints and everything kind of hinder that. It's a very personal, emotional kind of aspect, which not a lot of bands get the opportunity for. So that is something that I personally really like, and I think you should keep on doing that with the rest of the bands.
Don't worry, we will.
As for weaker points, I'm always difficult to get to get into the weaker points. I actually enjoy each and every opportunity. I honestly enjoy these kind of interviews because it's a good opportunity for us to further express ourselves. Like, for the time being, we never had the opportunity to go so deep into the lyrics, and that's an amazing opportunity. If I may, and I'll put him a bit of in an uncomfortable spot. Hello, Maria. That's Jack's girlfriend. Um, I'll put him in a bit of a more annoying spot. He's very good to give a very unbiased kind of opinion, so I'll leave the weaker part to him.
All right, Jack, lay it on me, man.
Alright, coming from a younger generation where my attention span is not so good, it's a bit long. As in, I like how detailed it was, because it was a good opportunity for us to, explain every nitty-gritty detail, but it's tiring.
Yes. No, absolutely. No, I completely understand that. It's that's one thing that a lot of people have said is just in regards to modern generations, the attention span, let alone the stimulation that is meant to be depicted in music, in videos, in social media, engagement, things like this, podcasts and interviews, to where either it's funny all the time and that's why you're engaged, is because you like the comedic bits, or if you are passionate and you want to go deeper like I do. For the people that do appreciate it, I think so far we have 49 followers over on Spotify and then 131 subscribers on YouTube. So we're steadily climbing. It's just a matter of consistency and hoping to continue making do on the promise of getting at least 5 sessions out per month, no matter what the band is, no matter if it's a casual one-offer or it is a 4-date build-up leading up to a new album, right? That's the difficult part about getting this crosscast, getting this show together. It's always been time constraints, especially when you're trying to do things on a global level. It's like, at one point, once upon a time, I said, we probably shouldn't just settle for the United States. We should interview every band from every corner of the world as often as possible for the sake of international networking and just getting our name out there. Like, chances are more likely than not that with Eden Adversary and Mock Luke, and now in the near future, most likely, Unhallowed Promethean from the Philippines, Diarcia from Vietnam, I think we're gonna be having a lot more folks from the southeastern regions of the world who are talking about us and as long as there's one country and a good majority of that community and they're prolific bands talking about us and like, yo, we're about to get back on the Anatomy Crosscast, that's really all that I care about. You can't these days really settle for just one region of the world. You have to go global if you want to do something like I'm trying to do with this show. But yes, definitely attention span, the duration of the show, the duration of the sessions. Like hell, one of our recent ones was 5 hours, and I didn't even know that until I finally edited the video, compacted it, uploaded it, all that stuff. So yeah, definitely duration, attention span. That's something to keep in mind. But also, I look back to my 27-hour straight drive from Tennessee moving back here to Arizona back in spring of 2023, where quite literally in the span of 27 hours, I maybe took 2 20-minute breaks. Other than that, I was rocketing through these states in my little sedan with my car packed up so to the brim that, you know, in some cases it could be illegal, could be dangerous to do what I was doing. But not only that, there were a couple times where semi-truck drivers almost had me shooting off major interstates, and I could have definitely died. But then I think through all that process, and I'm like, well, what if there was a show, and what if I continued to expand upon the duration? That way people had more conversation to listen to. Sure, every now and then, I listen to podcasts that are only an hour. I notice that some people in the group are paying attention to the time span. They're like, okay, we've been doing this for an hour. Call it a day. And they're like, we're good. We can go for another hour. For me, I'm like, nah, dude, I want to kind of upgrade the quality and upgrade the shock factor just with the duration. Like, what did they end up talking about for 4 or 5 hours? Like, what the hell? And some of our better sessions were the longer ones too. Some of our better, the ones with the better analytics and statistics actually were the longer standing ones. So that's the only reason I have confidence in that process, but it does come at a cost to the musicians and the artists associated, the availability of the members of the band. There's a whole bunch of stuff that ends up bouncing around. But yeah, I continue to take that into account whilst I still do these longer sessions, because if nothing else, either you're going to be the person that says, it's a 5-hour podcast session, there's no fucking way there's any substance to that conversation, or you'll be curious and you'll be like, what did they talk about for 5 hours alongside a goofy 5-track slam EP? And then that's where really the titles come in. But I appreciate then the transparent critique, the honest critique from both of you. Now, the final question really would be, in regards to the process that you've gone through so far, unfortunately the rescheduling a couple times, but we were pretty good with that this time. What bands would you both want to see on the Anatomy Crosscast, whether local to Haine or with some of the European and UK connections that you guys have made, bands that you've met whilst going to tour with these other bands? What bands would you guys want to see on the show, and why?
I think I can go local and say that, yeah, Murder would be a good option.
It's a legacy then.
Exactly. I mean, they've been going strong for the past almost 20 years now at this point in time. They still keep things fresh. They still change things around every now and then. And for a band that's been almost 20 years going strong, I think they are very worthy of a good in-depth spot like that. So that's local. Foreign.
Stillbirth. Would be a fun one.
True. Stillbirth. Yeah. Stillbirth is a slamming deathcore kind of band. You seem to know about them.
Yes, sir.
And I think Stillbirth would be a very good opportunity. And I know Lucas would enjoy it.
Especially Lucas with his his Death Fest over in Germany as well. So he's well connected to the scene. International bases as well. They have a branding element to it with the surfing.
Yeah, no,
Surfboards.
honestly, it's Stillbirth would be a great one to have. I think you said Murder for the first one, which is a Haine local
ClubMurder.
of Murder. Okay, so of Murder, right?
Murder.
Okay,
Club.
okay.
CLUB.
Oh. Okay, cool. So, in that case, then we have a legacy Haine band that's been going 20 years strong. And if anything, I'll have you guys send the Anatomy Crosscast Instagram at the Anatomy Crosscast. Go ahead and send me a link, please, for the either account or maybe one of the albums for the Haine local. That way I can kind of do my research, reach out to them, and also if you could do us a favor, because I think for the sake of networking, it might need that reinforcement. Let them know that you guys want to see them on the show. We'll reach out as well. Hopefully it'll be two forces going in at once, and then we can get something started. But that could be really, really fun. And then with Stillbirth, of course, that is a pretty well-known European, UK local, but they've definitely come over here to the US a couple times. Stillbirth, I know, would be a really, really fun, heavy, true counterculture band that doesn't take themselves too seriously. That would definitely be a fun band to have on the show, so I look forward to getting that set up as soon as possible. Pardon me. But after all this time and all the time that we've taken out of your days, out of your nights as of recently, I think that will be the end of the Anatomy Crosscast and its first date crosscast, its first date session with Haine from the island of Malta. As we're kind of concluding session, if you guys wish to, just go ahead and provide highlight, shout out to anyone behind the scenes, even the cameramen behind, the lake music video, any of your photographers. Like, let's get all these people well associated with the audience of the Crosscast.
So first thanks would be to David Pasquale, who is our producer, our sound engineer when we were recording the album. He is also the guitarist of ClubMurder, the guys that we sent you.
Okay.
And I play with him with Abysmal Torment as well, but he owns the studio. He's a very good sound engineer as well and very good producer. And we send him our best of love because we love the guy. So that would be first and foremost. We have to say thanks as well to Nicolas Bonello. He is our videographer. He has worked all our music videos so far. We are very happy with the product that he's always given us. Now we got to a point where working relationship is more on a friend basis rather than like just a band member talking to a videographer. As well, Matthew Marchia, who helped us with some of the footage when Nick wasn't available. We have to thank as well Etienne Bugeya, who is the guy that does photography in our case. And he had also previously helped us with the album cover EP for the EP. A friend of mine, Claire Borch, who actually helped us because she is a psychologist, and she helped us with the whole drafting of the concept of the contact cycle that I was getting into. So we had a couple of discussions with her and she helped us a lot with that.
Our partners, because we spend a lot of money on this shit.
And we test their patience beyond belief. So those, we also have to thank one of the only local venues that there is in Malta because they have always been very helpful and they've always helped us out in terms of local shows, which would be the Garage. The venue is called the Garage. Renee and Darren take care of it. We're super thankful of all the opportunities they gave us throughout. We have to say thanks as well to Ben Duer and Andreas Bjulver from Shadow of Intent and Cabal because thanks to them and thanks to their availability, we had the opportunity to have them in our album, which to us leaves a very good mark because we love both bands. It's fucking amazing to have two crucial members of a band in your album as well, kind of,
Absolutely.
And everyone who listens to the album.
And all the especially up until this point, especially our local and fans who have been with us ever since our first EP, even internationally speaking. We send our best of love because thanks to you, we have made all this possible.
Hell yeah. And it's really cool at the very end of the session to announce that most likely we will be hosting, if not the entirety, we'll be hosting Andreas from Cabal to lyrically dissect and promote their new album, which also happens to be Purple. But I look forward to getting Cabal on the show, on the Anatomy Crosscast, if we're able to. And otherwise, I think we are done. I think we are done with sessions. So thank you, everybody, for listening to the Anatomy Crosscast in our first date session with Haine. And we look forward to next time. Until next time.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.